Oh, gotta go. See you.
Anything you say, Ken, will be used against you. No? No. All right, guys, let me get to my share my screen here, and then we'll get right started. Straight away, here we go. All right, can y'all see that?
Yeah.
Bingo. Do that. All right, cool. There we go. Welcome to June's meeting, Zoom meeting. And we have this month and next month, which is going to be via video, Zoom. And then we'll start transitioning back into in-person and hybrid meetings starting in August. So those of you that live way out in Flagstaff or Sedona and don't want to come all the way down to Phoenix to see us great people in person, you'd be more than welcome to watch it live while it's being presented down here at Ability 360 starting in August.
August, I'll be in Missouri, so.
Pardon me? What if you're in Missouri? Well, you can Zoom it from, Zoom right in Missouri. Well, if you sign up for the meeting, you'll automatically get an email with the link for the meeting. So all you gotta do is click on it and you'll be popping right on in. I want to welcome new members. Again, David Byrd. We have Michael Luna, welcome. And then Irene Lienfelter and Marianne Kustran. And also from last month, I want to give, if you see Christian from Ability 360, give him a big thank you, and also Mr. Paul Bartell, our own photographer of the year from this last year, that they made a great presentation and they made it a very big success, and hopefully continue the hybrid meeting success in the future. And again, August will be our next meeting in person. And new, we have an image gallery on the website, and we want you to share your images, personal, professional, stuff you're working on, anything that you would like to share and put on the AZPPA website, and put in a members gallery, so that when people come to the website that they can see all the members' different styles of work, what you do professionally, personally, and just to know that, hey, we're a community of photographers with like interests, and we try and learn, grow, and share from each other, and we'd love you to share your work so others can see it as well, and that would be great. And also today we're going to be having a Savage Paper giveaway, and so that'll be done by Mr. David Byrd himself. After his presentation, he'll pick a question or two, and then whoever responds fastest in the chat will be the winner of the Savage Paper giveaway. Once you are the winner, I can text you the code for you to get your free roll paper, background paper from Savage. And just remember, before this presentation, please mute your mics and turn your video off if you have your bandwidth is slow, so that way it doesn't slow up the presentation. All right, Dave, you're up.
Oh, hey, wow. Okay, so coming up also this month, we're doing another AZPPA image critique. Some quick down and dirty details. It's going to be on June 22nd at 6 p.m. We're going to have here's the who's who, the who, what, where, whys, and whens, or in some order of that. John Wolf, Cassandra Sullivan, and Ellen Dupre, all actual AZPPA members and judges or judges in training. All our master photographers. They will be judging and offering critiques on your images. You can do it from the comfort of your own couch, because we're going to do this virtually live via Zoom. If you were with us back in February for our print competition, the state competition, or even further back last November, we had a critique all via Zoom. And we've got the kinks worked out of the system, and Mr. Jeff Burton at printcomp.com is doing it pretty well. So it's pretty smooth and from the comfort of your own home. So sit back with a glass of wine and watch up to 4 of your own images get critiqued. Remember, this is a critique, not a full-blown competition. So we're going to limit it to single images and not albums. So please do not submit albums. And this is all in preparation for our next upcoming competition, which is going to be IPC. The next slide will show what you missed already. So don't go there yet though, Rex. As an AZPPA member, if you are a member, you get up to 4 images for free. If you're not a member, it's a little $20 per image cost, up to 4 images. And because we're trying to promote it and it doesn't seem right to have to pay to attend the meeting if you're not a member, if you've submitted images, this meeting in June, on June 22nd, will be for free. So if you're interested in seeing what it's like and you're not a member, see what some of the valuable feedback you can get, come in and join us again for that meeting as well, again, for free. If you are interested, a couple things on the details. Images are going to be submitted via www.printcompetition.com, and it'll kind of walk you through that process. Again, for membership, there is no charge. As you walk through that image submission process, there will be a page that pops up to have you pay for it. You don't owe a thing, so just follow through that without putting any money in or credit cards. So just to reiterate one more time, as members, you do not need to pay at all for your 4 images. Okay, Rex. And our 3 judges, just to introduce you, Cassandra Sullivan. She's AZPPA member, but she's currently on the East Coast back in Massachusetts. I don't know that she's joined in yet. We have Ellen Duperret and John Wolf, both down in the Tucson area. They're going to be critiquing your images. So the way it's going to work on a critique is essentially get a merit, non-merit kind of thumbs up, thumbs down score. And then each image will have, one of the judges will offer some critique on maybe how to improve it or what was done really well in that image, and in hopes of giving you some feedback to improve your image before you go on to, next slide, Rex. The print competition. So deadlines coming up. As you can see, districts have already happened. They happened, well, technically now since it's June 1st, last month, they had the judging. So our next print competition is the International Print Competition, commonly referred to as IPC. Registration for that starts July 6th, goes through August 17th at 5 p.m. Eastern time. Late registration goes through the end of August, and judging will take place between the 12th and 17th. So that's kind of the quick gist on print competition. Why do you want to do these critiques before you enter competition? It's to help you get that, fine tune your images, get them ready for IPC so you can do well and get awards and stuff if you go to the PPA Imaging USA next January. So for our critique, important dates. Image submission deadline is June 17th at 10 p.m. And that's Arizona, PDT, MST, whatever. It's Arizona local time. So if you're not in Arizona, figure out it's 10 o'clock Arizona time. The critique itself will be June 22nd. Yes, there's a gap between submission deadline and June 22nd because it's for these old geezers who have to run it and get it all figured out. It gives us a little bit of a buffer. Unfortunately, the June 17th submission deadline is hard-coded, so we can't change it. No exceptions. Critique, let's see, the meeting begins at 6. Critique will begin about 6:30 after we do a little intro and get everyone prepped for it. So that's the quick gist on critique. Rex. We're adding and updating the image categories this year. I know when I first started doing critiques and competitions, some of my images, some of the airplane stuff didn't really seem to fit in. So we're trying to expand your categories that you can use and submit your images into. So the quick rundown is we have animal, obviously it's animals, commercial, anything of a commercial nature, products or things like that. Digital art / composite. Actually, we'll be covering that stuff tonight with David's presentation. Landscape, pretty obvious. Portrait, wedding, and if it doesn't fall into any of those 6, you got another. And remember, when you're submitting your images, image title and overall presentation can play a big role in how well your submission is received by the judges. So pay attention to that. It can play an important role. And what are they judging on? Rex, slide.
I'll just make a note too that for the digital art composite that they don't need to put their guide images in.
Oh, yes, thank you. You do not need to submit your guide images. You do need to have copyright, either written or own the copyright or written permission to use your images in a composite, but you do not need to submit your guide images. Slide Rex. And what are you getting critiqued on? Well, we're just like our image competitions. We're going to use PPA's 12 elements that cover pretty much the gamut of a storytelling image. So I can read them off quickly, or you can just go to our website and find links to it. But this is how and what the judges will be critiquing for on each image. Rex, slide. Oh, there we go. That was it.
There we go. Dave's done. Now it's back to me. Now, one thing that helps support AZPPA through the years and every year are our sponsors. Those are the ones that give us, donations to allow us to keep AZPPA going, give us gifts and items to be able to, that they donate to us for convention, for the raffle, for auctions, and all that. So please take advantage of these companies, as they also do a number of discounts for AZPPA members. For example, Artisan Color, Artisan HD, they give us a 20% discount for stuff that we get from them, and they are local too. Taylor Tools, I believe, gives us 10 to 15%, I believe. So just make sure that if you want to get anything, check the vendors on our website, click on it, and it'll take you straight to their site. And then please utilize them, because they're supporting us. And so let's support them and help keep AZPPA funded so each and every year. So don't remember, before the speaker presentation, please mute your mics, turn off the video if you have slow bandwidth, and do not forget, we're giving that Savage Paper giveaway after David's presentation. And now getting up to the moment of truth. This is the meeting with David Byrd, Photoshop Reality Imagined. Great guy, just talking to him for a bit. I've checked his website out. He does really phenomenal stuff. And he's a really great individual, and congratulate him. He is a new father, and he's a young bambino at home that he's helping take care of. So if he has to pop out from time to time, please give him the courtesy if an emergency arises for him. You can read this. He's an award-winning photographer, Photoshop artist, and educator. Specializes in unique portrait and photo manipulation art. Great work here, as you can see. This is the tip of the iceberg for him. He has a brand, Reality Reimagined. His artwork spans the genres of fantasy, glamour, fashion, all the stories found therein. In 2018, he received the Grand Award from the Shutterfest Image Competition and was nominated for a Grand Imaging Award in 2019 by PPA. He offers weekly education in photography and Photoshop artwork through his YouTube channel. You can see the link there, as well as teaching at national photography conferences. Let's give Mr. David Byrd, new member of AZPPA, a big welcome, and look forward to your presentation, David.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's really cool to meet, and I know this sounds like a duh statement, and everybody can hear me, right? Pretty well. Good. I hit mute earlier, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't cross the wires too many times. It's really cool to meet a collective of photographers every single time and every chance I get to, because it's that sense of camaraderie, that sense of we all are artists, we all get to learn from one another, and I enjoy that so much. And it's one that I didn't take advantage of in the beginning of my career, and I was more focused in business and trying to maintain the business and who is my competition and keeping the secrets close within the studio. And over time, I have come to really see the value in having these types of meetings. Now, sadly, because of the pandemic and Zoom becoming a much more popular thing, in this day and age we live in now, where we can connect so often and so easily, and there's so much that we can learn from everybody, whether it be through Zoom or YouTube or conferences or whatever. So it's something that I'm glad to be a part of it, especially knowing that this seems to be a good cohesive group. It was fun to listen to you all chat and talk about some of your experiences, adventures, the various animals and things that are attacking us from behind. Darth Vader is real, by the way. That's the first gift that my mother bought for our first studio that we had. She didn't buy us a lens or, insurance. She bought us a Darth Vader that when you walk past it, it talks to you. So it actually became a huge hit in our studio for a number of years, which, hey, there's a reason for everything. But well, let me go through some of the boring stuff and then get into all the nuts and bolts. And first and foremost, like if you have questions at any point, please hit me up. Like I'm not a pretentious photographer or artist. You can interrupt me. You can cut me off, whatever you want, and I'm happy to answer questions along the way, because I do plan on talking about stuff that'll be a little more complex when we get into some of the Photoshop elements of this. So if you have questions, hit me now, or you can always reach out to me. You can either email me at fly@realityreimagined.com, or you can hit me up on social media. I'm on Facebook Messenger pretty regularly, answering messages from friends and students there. So because we have our baby, I am a little delayed every now and again, just depending upon being honest, depending upon how many times he decides to have a diaper blowout, and then, you know, it's just a rough night, but we won't talk about that. So I got my starts in photography in 2005. I have a background in theater. I worked as an actor and as a director and a writer for a very long time. And that was my passion, that I wanted to go to Hollywood and make movies and be famous. And shortly after graduating from college, I was living in Chicago and was working, and somehow that path just kind of changed. And it's a long story, but at the same time, I had family that were professional photographers. And I had learned a lot about Photoshop when I was in school, but I didn't know much about the photographic camera. I knew a lot about video cameras, but not about photographic cameras. And when I started to wane away from theater and started to see photography as an art form, but then potentially a business, I was fortunate enough to uh, essentially leave a corporate America job that I hated and started working for a company called Video Home Tours that hired freelance photographers to go out and photograph residential listings to get a package of images to put on the MLS. And it was the first time that I got to work for myself. And it would take me about 45 minutes to photograph a home. And the more homes you photograph, the more money you made. So during the summer, I was up at 5 and was out shooting by 6:30. We got home around 8, 9 o'clock from shooting, and was making close to 6 figures for the first time, all from my ingenuity, my hard work, and with a camera. And that, like, 100% sealed the deal for me and said, this is the career that I want to go on. Because to be creative, to do art, to be sought for it, to get paid for it, and the harder you work, the more money you make, like it was just everything. And that's what I wanted to do. So my wife and I, at the time, we weren't married. We decided that we were going to move from Chicago back to Iowa, which is where I'm from, and buy a house, take all of our money, and start a business right at 2008. And I had started to hear that the residential market might be suffering soon. So I was worried about my job. Her job was very safe, but we were like, let's be young and stupid and change our lives drastically. We started our first business, our first studio, called Dream State Photography, in 2008, but it really didn't get off its feet until 2011. And during that time, we very much started on the job. And again, another long story, we were going to be picking up different pieces of others' businesses, and we had been assisting them for a while. So it wasn't like we were walking in blind, but we didn't have a lot of secured accounts on our own at that point. So we started in the best but worst possible way, because we had enough money to keep the lights on for 6 months. We had enough money to buy our first Canon 50D, our first 24-70 2.8s, and we bought a 70-200 that we could not afford, but we knew that we needed some sort of long lens for weddings, which was our chosen genre to get started into. Within a couple of years of really getting on our feet, we were the not.com's best of wedding photographers for 2 years in a row, and that enabled us to not have to do wedding shows, and people were coming to us. We started doing senior portraits, and we were doing headshots and families and babies, anything that would bring money into that studio. And it was a struggle. We loved the work, There were times when the work and financially it would feed us and we would be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then there were times that it didn't. And all through the process, we kept asking ourselves, is this what we want to do? Is this making us happy? Is this, the journey we want to go down creatively and put all of our money into this? And we continued and found levels of success. But in 2014, when the portrait business was doing really well, and we were learning that we needed to really expand into understanding business. So we started going in that road. We started attending conferences. We had went to the Iowa chapter of PPA, any workshop that they had. And then our first like large conference, we were going to go to WPPI, but we couldn't that year. And then we went to a conference called Shutterfest. And that one was an eye-opening experience because we got the business education that we needed. So as we saw the road ahead of us for business, we saw the road ahead of us of a competitive portrait market. Just to give you an idea, we were in Des Moines, Iowa, and 45 minutes north of us is Dan McClanahan, and an hour and a half east of us is Ben Shirk, and then 30 minutes south of us is Lori Nordstrom. So we were surrounded by very large names in our industry, and it felt like an uphill battle. But what we found was that the artwork itself was what was keeping us going forward. We would have people who, and I know Dan, and I love Dan to death. We had a young couple do a wedding interview with them, and then came and did a wedding interview with us and hired us, and told us that they were so thankful that they found us because our work is just as good, if not better. And they whispered that, which I was like, right on. And they said, and you're half as cheap. You're half the cost that they are. And when they left our studio after signing the contract, we locked the door and raised our prices on everything by 30% because we realized we were too cheap. That journey I bring up because my exposure to this industry started with the idea and passion of art, but it very quickly became just stifled with business and sleepless nights of how are we going to exceed our sales for the next quarter? How are we going to go further with the business? Our competition's doing this. We have to go better. And all the while, the things that made us the happiest, at least for me as being the primary photographer and artist in the studio, we weren't worrying about the art. As long as it was edited well enough for IPS, then we were good to go. So I started, and we worked practically about 7 days a week. And I started taking Sundays, which were to be our day off, reading Photoshop User Magazine. YouTube was a thing at that time, but not as popular. And I was constantly trying to continue my own education in Photoshop, because if the art was what made me happy and the art was going to be our leverage to make more money, then I knew that I had to go further with that. We could buy all the gear in the world and learn all the business acumen that we needed. But if the art didn't match, then I felt like we weren't going to succeed, or that it wasn't worth success if the art wasn't there. Don't get me wrong, I would have taken several barrels of cash and said, screw art. But at the time, it was still important. And to me, to this day, it is. So as I was constantly going on the journey of learning, that's right around the time that we started getting a lot of requests from our brides saying, can you Photoshop dinosaurs chasing us? Or there was a couple that the gentleman did not want to get married in a church, and his wife insisted that they did. So he paid me and a design fee, and he bought our biggest wall portrait, and I photographed them fleeing the church, and we didn't tell her what it was about. It was just going to be like, oh, a dinosaur's going to chase you. But he's a big Star Wars fan, so I photoshopped a big wide angle shot, whole wedding party's running, and I photoshopped the Death Star up into the sky, blowing up the church, which was his request. And he was very happy. His bride was not, but he was very happy. And that was the first time that I got paid to create a composite. And I remember turning to my wife, who was my business partner at the time, and said, wow, there's something in this. I mean, this dude wants to spend this much money for the Death Star blowing up a church. Imagine what other people would pay money for composites. So we expanded the composite artwork into our senior portrait business, and that made a huge difference because it enabled us to separate ourselves in our market. And it wasn't, at the time, we didn't realize this, but with hindsight being 2020, it wasn't that we could do something that was quote unquote new. It was that we were taking the time to listen to our clients and ask them, what art do you want to create? We went through this great procedure and process of where do you want to photograph, what kind of clothing you need to wear, and all those things. But this was the first time that we sat down and had them tell us their artistic visions beyond Pinterest or beyond some simple medium that really doesn't communicate a damn thing. And when we offered that to our clients, they saw an opportunity for something that wasn't being done by our competitors, which was collaboration. That they could come to us, they pay us as the professionals, and they collaborate with us, and we create artwork through them and with them. And they were a part of our business as much as we were a part of their lives. And I truly do believe that because we decided to go into composite work, that created that thread for the business. So that's the origin of my career, and why compositing at the time was something that felt like an integral part of it. Then I went to a comic book convention because I'm a nerd, and I'm there blowing off steam, and I'm walking in, and I've been to them before. And I decided to take my camera, and as I'm walking in, there is a dude dressed up as Superman, and he's standing on a rock, big rock outside the convention. And there are several photographers laying on their backs, looking up at him, photographing him as he's doing this to make it look like he's flying through the sky, standing on a rock, and they're photographing him. And I watched in like just pure disgust and was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I get what they're trying to do. And I mean, I'm the pretentious, snobby photographer, comic book nerd who's standing there like, huh, this is so dumb. Where's Photoshop? Shouldn't they just be using Photoshop for this? And my wife was like, well, if you can do it better, you should do it yourself. And I was like, okay, well, then I will. So I hired a model, bought a Supergirl costume, and I just saw a question that I'll read here in just one second. Bought the Supergirl costume, brought her in, shot 1,000 frames to only use like 5 because I was nervous. But getting the lighting right, getting the pose right, trying to create what I saw in my head. And I will show you that piece of artwork here in just a minute. When that was done, and I had went purposefully on the journey to get all the moving parts together for a photo shoot to create one vision. And it was a vision that had no output for dollars. It had no business being anywhere in my business, because brand recognition alone or brand confusion alone would have been devastating to our business at the time. You have a high school senior mother go to the Dream State photography site and see a picture of Supergirl. They don't want to send their teenage daughter to the creep that's going to photograph her like a superhero. So the art process and that satisfaction, it was undeniable to me. This was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to tell the stories in my head that I have with me all the time, that my imagination generates constantly. And I don't mean any of these things that I say as boasting or arrogance or frilly, frou-frou artistic BS. Like, this is just who I am, and this is the truth of who I am. Like, I'm never alone in my own thoughts. I'm constantly creating stories and characters, and I can be taking a shower and start writing the first act of a 5-act play in my head. Like, it's just, I've always been that way. So photography became the opportunity, and compositing became the opportunity to be able to create all of that and get it out there. But creating composites and figuring out how to do it best, there was not a lot of education back then. There was a book from the Scott Kelby group, the Photoshop user group. There were a couple of international magazines that gave you some pointers and some tips, but a lot of the tools and ideas were being discovered for the first time as Photoshop would continue to advance through its iterations. And let me read that question. David, how do you avoid copyright issues when clients ask for commercial images such as the Death Star? So that's a great question. Essentially, here's here's the long and short of the copyright issue. And I've talked to an entertainment lawyer about this a couple of different times, as well as I have some friends who essentially work for movie studios that are enough in the know that they can kind of pass this along. The technical explanation is that if you do not own the copyright, then you are in violation. So if you're using the Death Star, Mickey Mouse, the Superman logo, you are in violation of copyright, and you can be sued. You can get the cease and desist, all those different things. The most general sensible explanation is that anything that you're going to create, because there are artists that go to comic book conventions, for example, that create original artwork all the time based upon an IP that they don't own, and they're making a lot of money. It hurts the brands and the studios to go after every artist and say, you can't do this. You can't make this t-shirt, this mouse pad, this 8x12 piece of art that you're selling at a comic book convention. So when I have done, speaking to an entertainment lawyer several years ago, essentially the idea is that, like, for instance, if a cosplayer hires me to create artwork for them, they are not paying me to deliver the artwork itself. They are paying me for my Photoshop service. And that's the sophistry. So that in the contract, when I hand over the artwork to them, it clearly stipulates that I no longer am the owner of it. It belongs to them. What they do with it at that point is up to them. Now, I used to license the artwork in the past, but that became just kind of a joke. So now pricing is one where I set pricing to give them the full resolution, the full art. I retain the right to use it in my portfolio, as well as image comp if I wish to, or to have it published, but they will then retain the right to sell it and make money from it. So at that point, my business entity is no longer involved, and it's now up to the individual, if that answers your question. So essentially, short answer is it's copyright violation 99.9% of the time. Disney's not going to come after you because it costs them too much money. It's too much of an issue. If in the realm of things like fan films on YouTube, that's a big thing right now, because that's something that's very easily tracked and monetized, where studios will shut down those types of artistic endeavors. But if you were to do a speed art video on YouTube about your artistic creation of the Death Star blowing up a church, they're not going to hurt. They're not going to come after you for that. So you should be okay.
A quick follow up on that, David.
Sure.
Does using their Death Star or whatever image in a friendly light of the totality of the image help alleviate any concerns? Like,
Yes.
you're not like a dog pooping on the Death Star is not going to attract,
Yes.
unwanted, or
Yeah.
probably a bad example,
And-
but it's all I could come up with.
Oh, no, I hear you. And stranger things have happened with poop in the last 4 weeks of my life with my son. So believe me, I feel you. Yes, absolutely. And it's just a general rule of thumb that if you are going to borrow anything that is outside of your own ownership or IP, and you try to create something that is incensing with it, something that is societally, all the societal issues we're facing right now, if it's politically motivated and so forth, that's going to show up on the radar real fast. And if that does, then you're kind of asking for trouble at that point. And it's one that, and I'm glad you asked the follow-up, because it's one that I give away images through my YouTube channel so that people can work alongside. And I say at the end of the video, like, please don't do anything bad with this. Like, this picture of a model who it's a glamour fashion image. Please don't Photoshop an AK-47 in her hand, having her, blow away protesters, because that's ridiculous. Like, and it's a statement that takes art to a place that, if that's your journey, you want to go down that's your prerogative, but don't borrow my art or somebody else's to do that. Take the time to make your own. So if that answers that question.
It does, yes.
Cool. So I started Reality Reimagine in 2014. Keep the brands separate. And by 2017, the senior photography business was finished. Dream State was finished, mainly because at that point we had decided that my wife wanted to go back to get her master's in social work and start working with kids, which had been her passion her entire life. And to be quite honest, we were husband and wife running a business, but we had forgotten how to be husband and wife. We were business partners, and it was driving us batty. We saw the health of our marriage, we saw the health of our lives, her following her dreams. And she said, "Hey, I want to go to ASU." Her sister-in-law lives here with her husband, who's a native of Arizona. And she said, I'm going to go down there. That's why I'm going to go. Do you want to go down there? And I was like, well, I've lived in the Midwest my entire life. I don't want to go live in the desert because there's nothing down there but rocks and bugs and plants that try to stab you to death. So no, why would I want to go do that? And then we talked about it, and she came down here to get started on a couple of opportunities. And I came to visit while I was trying to make the decision. I was going to winter in Phoenix and then summer in Iowa. And I came down to visit. It was 118 degrees when I got off the plane at Sky Harbor. I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I got off the plane. I took my wife's Prius and got it cleaned and washed, and I barely broke a sweat. Then 3 or 4 days later, I got off the plane in Iowa. It was 87 degrees in Iowa, but the humidity was 90%. And by the time I got off the plane, my clothes were stuck to my body with sweat and humidity. And I called my wife and said, I'll move to Phoenix because there's no humidity. Let's go. And then that first winter, when it was 1 degree in Iowa, and it was 60 here, and I was sitting outside grilling, sending videos to my friends who were shoveling snow and going, but then, I saw a scorpion, and then we're not friends. So anyway, when we relocated here, I gave reality or imagine everything I had. And that was my path. I started doing commercial work through it. I started teaching. The composite work was one that was both an artistic endeavor that was enjoyable to me, but it was also one that I was trying to do to start bringing in any kind of money that I could. And being completely upfront and honest, it has been a turbulent road, because stepping into the realm of trying to figure out how to monetize the work and how to be able to make the most from it became more and more increasingly difficult as compositing became more popular and the education became more plentiful. There have been people, of course, superimposing and compositing for years, but with digital photo editing and every iteration of Photoshop, it becomes easier and easier to do. And I know that may seem like an arrogant statement to some of you, that to me, Photoshop and compositing is very easy to do. And I fully respect anybody who says, hey, it's hard. It's really challenging. Photoshop it's incredibly daunting. It is in my opinion, easy to start learning it, but hard to master it, in the same way that compositing is, because it is not, in my opinion, one sequence of events that you can follow every single time, whether it be just a basic retouch or doing a composite itself. You can never follow one system. And a lot of the motions and the things that you do will feel the same. And there will be repetitive elements of every piece of artwork that you create. But inevitably, at some point, challenges present themselves that you have to figure out how to navigate through and what you're going to do to solve the problem. And this is where we get to a point where I commonly refer to it as building a bag of tricks, so that you have different ways of solving a problem in Photoshop when you're doing a composite, because the way that worked on Monday will not be the way that works on Tuesday, and so forth. And new ways will become better as you go forward. Things that we've done for years in Photoshop still work well to this day, and then no matter how much new technology they create. So it's this constant back and forth, but the more knowledge you accumulate, more tools that you accumulate and ways of solving things, the faster you're going to get on your journey of being able to create the artwork that you see in your mind. So let me show you some of my work, and then we will talk. So you should be able to see bridge, correct? Yep, cool, I saw the thumbs up. So this is my first composite, my first human composite. This is my son, Sebastian Charles Byrd. He's named Sebastian after the crab from Little Mermaid, because that's my wife's favorite movie. It is also his spirit animal when he's not happy. He's a very crabby little baby. Charles is my father's first name, and then Byrd. And this was taken by my sister-in-law yesterday morning when they went for a walk. He doesn't really like the Bjorn, nor does he like the hat. And this is his perplexed look that you get before he starts screaming. And you can hear him scream from everywhere. So that's my son. All right. So here's the first composite that I made a long time ago. And that's the model I hired. That's the crappy Amazon costume that I purchased. And this was utilizing my skills in Photoshop at the time for what I knew my artwork to be, what I knew compositing to be. There are a bazillion mistakes in this, and there are a bazillion issues in this. And that isn't self-deprecation. It is using this as an example to explain some of the things we'll talk about today that are these tools, the new tricks that you can start adding to your bag of tricks. And these bags of tricks, I strongly challenge you to accept them not as tools just for compositing. These go into the basics of what we already know as photographers. And I think when people get into compositing, they feel like it's a completely different art medium, that whether it be surreal, conceptual, just straight up composite, they abandon some of these rules photographically. And we'll revisit all that. So this is the first superhero. I'm a DC Comics boy. Nothing against Marvel. I just grew up with Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. So this is the first one I created with Reality Reimagined. This is the most recent piece I've created involving a super. And similar ideas here between the two, but which one looks like cheesy composite and which one looks like artwork. And when I say artwork, I don't mean to come off boasting or arrogant or like, oh, this is my artwork, like appreciate my art. No, I'm saying it because this has, as we just saw, those 12 elements of image comp. This has impact. This has story. This has a way for us to connect. Does this have the same feeling? And a big part of creating great composites is about that. It's about the impact and the story. It always comes back to that. And I can teach you until the end of time all the tools you need to know in Photoshop, and you can learn everything there is to know about them. But if you do not start with story, if you do not start with the idea and some of the basic core elements of how you generate a story, the beginning, middle, and end, your composites can only go so far. And they feel like posters or just pieces rather than artwork. This is one of my first Batman composites. I'm a Michael Keaton Batman fan. All the other Batmans are irrelevant. This has a huge error in it. And I knew it at the time, but I didn't think it would be that noticeable, but it is. And we'll explore that in just a moment. This is same Batman, and that's his wife. This was the final piece that I made for the two of them many years later. And again, trying to get into those elements of story. This was a whole series of images where we essentially wrote a mini story about the idea. If anybody has seen the Batman versus Superman movie, if you haven't, very briefly, Batman tries to kill Superman because he thinks Superman's a threat, because it's an allegory to today's world. But then at the end of the movie, it all resolves peacefully. So we decided to make this story where Supergirl comes to Gotham to kill Batman because Supergirl is Superman's cousin. So we created a whole composite series around this that those two used as cosplayers. They used this artwork they gave away at hospitals and at charity events where they go and appear as cosplayers. So they never paid me a dime. I never charged them a thing. I never asked for money, and they do good work. And this is some of the output of my work, is to be able to give work like this away, and seeing kids in hospitals or seeing just little kids at birthday parties get to meet Superman and Batman and Supergirl and get their own poster and so forth. It's a treat. So I know a person who knows Kevin Smith, and Kevin Smith is about to relaunch the Masters of the Universe He-Man on Netflix. And so I made this poster and sent it to a friend of a friend of a friend that was supposedly going to put in his hands to hopefully get me a job. And funny how Kevin hasn't called. jerk, but whatever. So this is a group of cosplayers here in Arizona that are all He-Man nerds, and so we got together and just created this for fun. The castle was made out of stock images I purchased from Adobe and bashed together, and then the clouds are mine, the rocks are mine. We went to New Mexico and spent a few nights shooting stock. This was entered into the IPC 2019 and merited. It's a very simple composite. It's just literally the stock image in the background, and then of course the model and the sword. This is a what I would call a kit bash. So essentially, I decided that I wanted to. I play a lot of video games because I'm a nerd. I don't play anymore now that I have a baby. And there's a character in a video game that's clearly not a good person. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to take this base picture of my friend Veronica, who's a wonderful, beautiful model, and bash together a whole bunch of pictures of ram's horns and armor pieces and so forth that I bought in a stock pack and see what I could create, because I just wanted to make something from nothing. And it's these kinds of adventure endeavors in art that is what expands my skill set. So the point of that in saying that is that I spent so much time in business telling myself that I can't create artwork unless there is a through line with it that leads to dollars. I can't waste time during my week playing around with these pictures unless I have some way to make revenue from it. And I have since then learned that that is a very bad opinion to have, because yes, we need to make work to make money to survive, but we also need to make work simply for the joy of creating it and what we learn from it each time. This was photographed at a comic book convention up against a wall, but again, exploring different ideas as I was expanding my own knowledge. A lot of my work before is very presentational. It's very flat. You see the subjects, they are flat to you. We don't have differing angles. We don't change our view to them. I wanted to start changing that view. I wanted the audience to feel that they're connected in a way to this that's different than just seeing her, turn to her side, photograph or shooting off camera left. Instead, I brought the gun to the camera, trying to break that fourth wall and let the audience be a part of the journey of these stories. This was photographed in his living room. This is our eye with Thor. This is 3 different pieces of him put together, which is a common thing to do in composites, especially for action shots. So this leg is body number 1, and this leg is body number 2, and then the torso is body number 3, which is a common thing to do for super people, that you just get them to lift the cape and do one leg up and then extend one leg down and then just put it all together. So this is a recent piece that I did. Again, Rex and I were talking beforehand about 3D, and this is before I knew how to rig a 3D Stormtrooper. So this is actually a little Stormtrooper figure that I have, that I posed and took several pictures of, and then just put into the shot, because I just wanted something for these 2 Star Wars nerds, because they were a part of my online training that I have. So this work is, again, another step into a direction that I was trying to work with, which is typically when I photograph a cosplayer or a fantasy character, I photograph them with the mindset of 2 or 3 pieces of art that I want to create. So I have a lighting pattern that will match it. I don't necessarily find the stock ahead of time, but I know the vision of what I'm trying to create so that I will do the lighting. In this case, I purposefully did this entire shoot with her with just generic flat lighting, and gave myself the challenge of using Photoshop and different adjustment layers to be able to augment the lighting itself to make it look like the potion bottle is glowing, that we see the reflections in her eyes, that it's glowing on her face, and so forth. Trying to, again, go further with Photoshop and expand. This is a piece that is all made in 3D except for the model and the sword she's holding. So the moon, the clouds, the buildings in the background, the ground she's standing on, all made in 3D, using a series of models from a company called Kit Bash, where they make pre-made models of different genres and styles. And you can work with them in a program like Blender, which is free. And you're able to assign lights to them and textures to them, and create an entire world. And it's truly fascinating. And I'll talk more about this later, but it's, I believe, the next step, if you are serious about compositing, is to start embracing 3D, because as Rex said earlier, there's only so many stock images you can find to fit your vision. And if you can't find the stock image of a dragon in the right angle, the right perspective, the right feeling, then you have to learn how to make one. So, which you can do by kit bashing a whole bunch of different stock images together, or you can learn 3D. So this was my first piece that won this one Grand Imaging Award at the Shutterfest Image Competition, and um, I entered it, I mean, on purpose, and I wanted it to do well. I had no idea or any aspiration that it would win the top award. The rocks are from Iceland. My wife and I traveled there in March of 2018, specifically so I could get pictures of these rocks to use, because everything in the composite you have to be the image maker of it. So we traveled halfway across the world just so I could get stock of rocks. I've always wanted to go there anyway, so we went. The clouds, and it was a storm the day I got to Arizona and moved here. It was a massive storm in the backyard, so I just whipped out the camera and took a picture of it, which I will give Arizona this, that there are some incredible thunderstorms that come across the Midwest plains, but my gosh, when a storm hits here, it is a sight to see. And the first dust storm that I drove through, I felt like I was in a post-apocalyptic horror film. Like, I thought I was going to die. And I had to pull over because at one point it was snowing inside the dust storm. There was snow accumulating on the ground. And it was, I really thought I was in the Twilight Zone. This is a piece that went to loan in 2018 IPC. And then this was the nominated for a GIA in 2019. And this composite is a very simple one. It's that same storm cloud, just turned 45. And all of these little monsters are 3D rendered pieces of stock from Adobe, the wings, of course. And then I had photographed this model at Shutterfest. And one of the things that I do when I'm photographing any character, so this is kind of a nugget that I would throw out there. Doesn't matter if it's cosplay, fantasy characters, whatever it is. I teach about it and say it's building a library of images. So I will do all these amazing poses, and her name's Mary. She's beautiful. She's very scary in this costume. So I have many images where she's actually facing the camera. But I do images once I get 20, 30 of them facing me, telling different stories, different poses. I will get different shots where they're looking to the side, give me a profile. I will do shots where their back is to the camera, acting just as she is, because I never know when I can pull that library and use it for a future composite. So if you are in the realm of photographing, you're at a convention, you're at a conference, you hire a model to come in, you've got a vision, shoot more than you need and get that library of images, varying angles, down low, above, turn to camera, completely away from camera, get shots where their finger is right at the edge of the camera like this, and that you have to look at their finger and see a faded out version of their face, because you never know when that's going to come back into play when you have the vision pop into your mind. And then that's my son. So anyway, compositing. To me, compositing is as simple as adding a texture to an image. The moment that you take one element that didn't exist in the original artwork and add it to it, another stock image, another person, a head swap, changing eyes, that's compositing. And on a simple level of compositing, there's some easy tools that we can explore that will help you tremendously get through to where you need to be with that. However, when we get into complex compositing, which is creating these pieces of art that have story and impact, where they come from, what they involve, those same tools that you use to, the quick selection tool, select a mask, using channels, all the different ways that you can do things in Photoshop to be able to make selections, layer masks. These things are universal across the entire board of compositing. When you want to make a composite that tells a story, that has a feeling, it has to start again with the origin of, why are you making the art in the first place? What is the feeling for you? What does it evoke for you? And then being prepared to have that feeling be trashed by anybody who sees your art, because they could have a different feeling. They could have a different story. And it's one where, you know, if you do compete in image competition, it is, I think, a great thing to do, because it gives you the opportunity to put your artwork to a test. Does it mean that what these judges tell you is the end all be all of your artwork? No, not at all. And this is just my opinion, that art is subjective. So you can have a judge look at your artwork and give it 100, and then the next person sitting next to you give it a 65. And the person giving it a 65, maybe they don't like Superman. Maybe they're thinking, should I have Doritos instead of Cheetos at lunch? They, you know, it's just a random element. But when you go through the process of preparing your artwork for Image Comp, the more that you go through it with a fine-tooth comb, the more that you're going to start finding little elements that you can learn and improve. Not errors, not things that have to be fixed, but things that you can improve. Because you're putting your artwork to a test that you've never done before. Even if you're putting your paid artwork in front of your clients and they're so happy and they love it, they aren't rarely going to have a laundry list of things that they can say, well, this is a place I see for growth. They're just happy with the artwork, hopefully. If not, then they're just crappy clients. So you got to find the story. You got to find the impact. So that's one of the first things I want to talk about here. And any questions thus far? Hopefully I haven't bored you to death with my life.
No, it's going really well. I'm like, this is a great presentation. So keep up the great work. I mean,
Cool.
I'll interrupt
Awesome.
if anything pops up.
Loving it.
I mean, I'm focused on listening and trying to take notes. So keep it
Right
up.
on, right on. My favorite color is blue. I do like long walks on the beach. Anyway, so there is an author named Joseph Campbell, and this is something that, again, if you want to get into any type of, and it doesn't have to be composite work, if you're just looking to do more fantastical work, and what I mean by that is, and even in just something as simple as weddings or senior portraits, if you want to go beyond the portrait paradigm, if you want to go beyond just the stagnant portrait, this gives you a place to start focusing certain key elements that will help you kind of decipher a code of what to generate and what to create. So the author, his name is Joseph Campbell. He wrote a bunch of different literature, but he wrote this book called The Hero's Journey. And it became famous because George Lucas, who's the creator of Star Wars, he credited Campbell and said that Campbell's Hero's Journey was essentially his foundation for writing the script for Star Wars. And as we decipher this, if you think about the story of Star Wars, it becomes very clear. So you start at the top here. You know what? I'm sorry, I forgot to turn on my mouse tracker. Give me one quick sec. I typically do that before every meeting, and I was too busy flapping my gums. There we go. So if you start here at the top of the circle, this is Luke Skywalker, and it's the beginning of the adventure. So Luke Skywalker gets the call to the adventure because his aunt and uncle get killed by the Empire. He gets supernatural aid through Obi-Wan Kenobi. So here's where one of the interesting elements can take place. Now, I know this may seem boring, but come with me on this, because there are certain key elements in this circle that can be the things you hold on to start generating image ideas, whether it's fantasy composites or high school senior portraits. This is a threshold where they go from the known world to the unknown world. So in this case, he's meeting the Guardians, which is, again, Obi-Wan Kenobi and the key players here, but he has to cross over into this unknown world. He leaves Tatooine. His family's dead. He's in a ship with a Chewbacca and Han Solo and Obi-Wan Kenobi. He has no idea where he's going, but he has this call to adventure that motivates him to go here. Just this arc, I used this all the time when I would sit down with high school seniors and talk to them in the meeting and consultations and say, tell me essentially, what was your call to adventure? Like, what was it when you started in school? Was it band? Was it, you were going to be in football? What were the things your parents wanted you to be? What did you want to be? What did you choose? And the kid will tell you really quickly what they held on to, what was important to them. You'll usually find a teacher or some elements, something that made it different for them. The baseball bat that they got, the training they got with somebody, the their first camera became the supernatural aid, the thing that helped them go on the journey. But then they crossed into the unknown. There's a lot of emotion that happens right there when you cross into the unknown. What are the story elements that you can derive from the characters or the clients you interact with? Now, your corporate headshot client, do they give a shit about, and I apologize, I have a potty mouth. Do they don't care about the known and unknown world. They want to know how cheap you are and how fast they get their headshot back in color and black and white, right? So, but still, there's an element here as you start communicating with them, learning about when they got into business, where their business needed help, when it started to cross into a realm of unknown. This is how you can have a 2-minute elevator speech. Uh, Peter Hurley, like Peter Hurley constantly talks about how you engage in conversation with people, and and Leibowitz does the same. So you can start pulling information from them. It guides you as an artist to know what to capture. At the very least, it makes you look cool, and you've earned your dollars for the day. So this threshold here is a key element. The mentor, the helper is Obi-Wan Kenobi. They go through all the challenges. The revelation, the bottom here, this is where the MacGuffin comes into play. So the abyss, the death, and the rebirth, where we forever change from who we are in the known world, becoming something completely different in the unknown world. So in this case, Obi-Wan Kenobi dying, of course, but Luke Skywalker learning to use the Force. The Force is the MacGuffin. The MacGuffin is essentially an item. It's Excalibur's Excalibur's sword, the sword Excalibur. It's the lightsaber. It's my camera is my MacGuffin. It is the tool that lets me create magic. But most of the time, the MacGuffin is actually irrelevant. The MacGuffin is just a ploy. It's fake to get you to believe in yourself. So again, not to jump all over the place, because no, we're here to talk about composites, but the MacGuffin, I mean, how often, I mean, I jumped to the mirrorless Canon R as soon as I can get my hands on it because it was my MacGuffin. Did I really need the mirrorless? Did I really need the new RF 24-70 2.8? Do I need that 85 1.2? No, I can create artwork with a crappy Sigma that's broken, but I needed the MacGuffin. And the moment I got the MacGuffin, it gave me courage to go further to do the things I wanted to do. And as soon as I realized the art is the same, yes, the imagery looks vastly better on a Canon, I think, but Canon R and the RF glass. But was that gear necessary? Was that going, if I go to this one workshop and I learn from this one person, if I come to this meeting tonight and learn from David Byrd, am I going to be able to be a better compositor? No. There's nothing you're going to learn from me that's going to make you a better compositor. You will make you a better compositor. By gathering as much information as possible, by building your bag of tricks, I can be a part of that, but I'm not going to make it for you. You will do that. You will find your MacGuffin. You will find your death and rebirth in the unknown world. This is turning into an episode of Oprah, but anyway. And then you have the transformation, atonement, and then you return to the known world with the gift of the goddess, which in this case is my RF 24-70 f2.8, because it's a beautiful piece of glass. This is where story begins. So taking this now on a simple level for composites, what do you need to create? What is the story that you need to tell? What is the character that you portray? So like right now, I'm a father. I'm a very nervous father, being completely honest. My wife, as we were all talking, Dave and Rex and I were talking earlier, my wife, I have grown, I had tremendous respect for women before my son was born, and watching everything that she has gone through, knowing how beautifully and intelligently designed her body was built to be able to endure such stress, such pain, and just, she still perseveres. I am literally in awe of her. And that character of who she is gives me strength. It's created artwork in my head. It dictates photography angles. It dictates colors and stories, all because I have an appreciation for her strength and her confidence at the time when I am at the worst that I've ever been in my life as far as fear and anxiety is concerned. She walks around with that kid in one hand, and I want to hold him with 17 people at once wrapped in bubble wrap because he's a little infant, right? I'm learning about who I am right now, and that's dictating my art. It's dictating what I create. So to find a place for you to begin, ask yourself the question, like, what are you afraid of right now? Scorpions, spiders, make a composite about that if you want to, but that's just torture. What are the things existentially, deep down? Like, does anybody have imposter syndrome feelings? I mean, does anybody here feel like your art's crap and some other dude and lady in this group does way better work than you do? Why even enter pictures on June 17th? Because, you know, it's not good enough, or you need to go through it again. That's a place to start. That's a place to start for finding story elements that can have impact, that can help you to figure out what art to create. And I know, again, we all have, you know, regular lives and regular business lives. So it's not like we just sit around and generate a whole bunch of conceptual artwork, but this is where, if you wanted to, this is where it can start. Who are you? What are you afraid of? What fills you with joy? What makes you stand a little taller, a little bit more filled with courage? Is it that RF 24-70 strapped to your hip, knowing that you paid it off and now I'm walking around with my fancy glass, I can do anything I want? Is it the perfect sunset? Is it that you know you get to teach a group of individuals and that you're going to make a difference for somebody, which is one of the sources of strength for me? There's a story there. There's a character there, and you can find elements and ways to portray that. Again, if you want to go into more complex composites, this is one of those places to kind of do all of that. Any questions about that? Any thoughts or statements? Which is totally fine if there isn't. Just want to make sure. No? Bueller? Okay, good. I got a thumbs up. Okay, cool.
Yeah, you're killing it, dude. Just keep on on rolling.
So, and it's John Lewis, is that his name? John Ellis, excuse me, sent some artwork, and this is one of the things that I do want to go through. And if John is here, yes, I think so. And I'm assuming,
yeah, I'm here.
Okay, cool. And I'm assuming it's okay if I totally trash all your artwork and rip it up in front of everybody, right?
Rip away.
I'm kidding.
No
But
problem.
now that you've said that, I don't like the color yellow. It's my least favorite color. But one of the things that I've learned over time of teaching is that it is helpful to start looking at people's artwork, to start deciphering things that we can look at together, to start figuring out not what you did wrong, but where areas that you can go to make things go further. Not more believable, not better, they can go further. And it's these tools, it's these things that you all have got to store away in that bag of tricks that we talk about now. So this is getting us into some of that technical. What I do like to see, and again, any of you don't have to pay me, you don't have to send me anything. If you want to send us a box of Pampers, you can reach out to me with your artwork. I will happily give you my opinions. And just know one thing, I give opinions not from what I would do. I take a look at your work and try to figure out what you did. I don't look at artwork and go, well, I would have blah, 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 because it's completely useless. And if you want me to tell you what I would do, then we're wasting each other's time, because you're the one that's going on the journey to create the artwork. So later on after this, if you have work that is conceptual, full on composites, whatever, and you would like an opinion, I'm all about it. So let's go through some of this and start kind of getting an idea of story and impact. Because I think Dave and others can say this, that anybody who's been through image comp the two biggest things that they look at is impact and story. If it's got impact and story, they'll forgive quite a bit, or they won't even see a lot of stuff because the impact and the story hits them so strongly. So tell me, and I'm sorry, I'm really bad with names. John, yes. I don't even
Yes.
know my wife's name. Tell me that why the difference between these two? What are, because these are two obviously very, very different worlds.
Well, the first one there was pretty much basically the raw image, just with a little color boost and a little contrast boost, and I put in a sky. But it didn't do well when I first entered it. So I started looking at it and thinking, well, you know, this is England. This reminds me of Harry Potter's world and Diagon Alley and Hogwarts. And so I started working with it and just taking the images and reworking them and flipping them. And it's all pretty much from that just one image. All of these images are taken and modified. And I might have put another building in there. And of course, redid the sky and gave it a little more magical look.
And excuse me, how did you do on this reentry?
This one loaned.
Right on, right on. I thought I read that right in the email. I wanted to make sure because again, I had like 3 hours of sleep. So,
Baby.
Here's looking at this photographically, like, I mean, there's some elements just from some basic Photoshop stuff that are very minor that I would throw out just as a thought, but nothing that I look at to say, you know, it makes or breaks the image. What I find fascinating here, again, getting back to impact and story, is I'm desperate to know what's right around the corner, right around the turn. And being honest, yellow is my least favorite color, but so I'm not really taking in the building that much, so much as I'm taking in the road and in that story, and I want to go there. So hearing that this is reminding you of Diagon Alley and Harry Potter, like that I love. It speaks to my nerd heart. I want to know what's right around that corner so that when you see this surreal art, this takes it 100% in a completely different direction for me, because now I'm terrified to go down that road. I don't want to go anywhere into this place because this place is a house of horrors to me, a village of horrors that I have to navigate and figure out. This is impact, 100% impact. And it isn't, and so just speaking from my limited knowledge about image competition, which I only say limited knowledge. I mean, I've done a lot of research and been around it for a long time, but I don't consider myself like an authority on it. This kind of impact is what's going to pull those judges in so fast that if you get the one jerk that sits there and tries to pixel count to find one little error, then that person just doesn't enjoy their lives, because this has that story and you can flow through that story so well to the point that I don't even want to go down the road. This one makes me want to lean a little bit more into that way. So from a composite perspective, one of my first thoughts is, what can you do to start pulling the audience here? Something that lets us start to feel that we want to travel this way. So one of the key elements of compositing, in my opinion, is a design 101 basic philosophy, which is you have to guide the audience and tell them where to look. And they need to be able to hit that look, that one anchor point within the image immediately. So we know in photography, generally the brightest point in the image is where our eyes will go to first. So in this case, that hot yellow here is pulling me a lot. Does this hot yellow have story? Is there something there to make us stay with it and to be with it, to communicate impact and story? From a composition perspective and so forth, it's a beautiful image. And again, despite the yellow, like it's fine. Like, but from a story element, there's nothing here that holds me. So if something is photoshopped to be into one of these windows, and again, now we're talking about taking original pure photography and turning it into something else by using digital photo editing. But I'm not invited to stay here. Now, just me, I want to go here. Is there some light that's cascading out? Is there fog that's slowly drifting out? That subtle gesture here that, again, has impact because of the simple element of story that it can communicate. So do we have something here that we can pull in or not? And that's, part of the thought here when we look at this, like, there is nothing you have to do beyond what you've already done, because this is such a wonderful, impactful piece of imagery. The color palette works wonderfully. I appreciate the yellow is more yellow green now instead of pure on yellows, and it's having some harmonies throughout the piece, and that you are staying in the same color family on the same side of the spectrum instead of jumping all over the place, which is something that can happen. And there's some of that in the upcoming work too. So moving to this piece, and this one I love the idea of being up in the air and the sky ship and so forth, and the castle among the clouds. I'm an original Star Trek fan. I just got done watching. Anyway, so having this super imposition in the background. When I look at this, I see elements that are all being put together decently well. And again, I mean nothing that I say to be offensive or to be rude or to be curt or anything like that at all. I speak straight from the heart and straight from my mind.
I'm wearing my big boy pants. That's okay.
Right on. Make sure they're super absorbent, because diaper blowouts suck. Too many shirts have been washed thanks to my son. Anyway, here's the only thing that I want to, and this is a connecting element that I want to see in your work going forward, because clearly you know how to create impact. Clearly you know how to create story. And clearly you know how to use Photoshop really, really well, because you're putting everything into place in a way that makes sense. The world makes sense here. It fits. I don't know where to look. That's the key element here. So from a design perspective, design 101, the very foundation and beginning of composites, you have to tell the audience where to look. And we have two competing elements here that we're fighting against, trying to figure out what belongs where. What are the ways that we can drive the audience to one of? Can the ship be going to the castle? Can the castle be out of focus as the clouds are, so that the castle belies its distance, so that the ship is the closest to it? It isn't just a question of luminosity values that can pull focus through here. It's I don't know which to look at, but I appreciate the piece. So from that perspective, whether it be image comp, I apologize. One of our neighbors' children just got a ATV, and they have been going up and down the street with it, gunning their little muffler for as loud as they can get it. If you can't hear it, then I apologize. It's really loud. So trying to find that impact or connecting and where we want the audience to go. Same thing here. This is something that I look at artwork like this, and I love to look at it because there are so many things to take in and so many little elements to notice where you're like, oh my gosh, like, and you start finding bits and pieces, especially things in the background. So as a side note, making composites, they do not have to be, and I don't mean this derogatorily toward John, they don't have to be composites with several different objects and layers in them. They can literally be, I mean, the composite that I won the Grand Imaging Award of is 3 layers. It's a picture of a model, rocks, and sky. It's about story, it's about impact. But when you want to make a great composite, the more elements you add into it, the more intrigue that you give to your audience to stay with it and to start finding story, the better. So this, if this was on display at Imaging, I would stand in front of this for damn near 10 minutes looking at everything in it, because I want to know everything that's there. My eyes went here because I was looking for light. And so I wanted to connect here. And of course, coming into the middle here lets me travel around and drift. So with this composite, I want to officially say in stone, this is a great composite. Like, I love it. It's got all kinds of story, impact, and detail. Where it can go further is that philosophy of where do we need to look? Where do we need to travel? And where does the story take us by the anchor point that you choose for us to look at? And there's many different ways, excuse me, to be able to create that, whether it be luminosity values, things that are out of focus, colors, and so forth. Again, these surreal types of worlds and these floating skies, you're speaking my language. It reminds me of Avatar, and with all the floating rocks and so forth. This, I know exactly where to look, and I know exactly where to stay, and I'm happy with all of it. So this is a wonderful piece that then to go further with, I want to see you start taking into the level of realism of light, because light and how light and shadow play into a composite is absolutely essential. And I would say beyond the first key element that you've got to pay attention to, of course, is where the audience is going to look. The next one is how realistic is the lighting and the shadows. Your perceived value of your art, in my opinion, will go up 1,000-fold the moment that you start paying attention to, start respecting the light source in the image and then painting in shadows to compensate. So in this case, we don't have a direct light source, so we don't see the sun in this, but we have shadows that move roughly in the same patterns that they should. And this is me getting like technically precise and slightly technically bitchy. The shadows move almost exactly where they need to, but there isn't a clear definition of where that light source is coming from. So in a piece like this, to take this one further, because it's already great, take it further by letting some of that light and shadow come into play and guiding the audience then in the atmosphere and the feeling of the piece, rather than the technical precision of putting the world together. This one I really dig, because again, it's one that I want to stay with it the entire time. But this is a wonderful testament now to where do we look? Where do you want the audience to start taking this in? And there is no right or wrong answer. And the answer can be, I don't give a shit. They can look wherever they want to look, right? And that's okay, because it's your art. And as long as you have your big boy pants on and thick skin, so when you put this in image comp or somebody else goes, well, I think you should have blah, 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 like just tell them take a hike, because you made the work the way you saw it. For me, I went straight to the center because I saw this. Letters always pull focus. I saw this, and I know by the guide images, where is she at? Right there. But she is the most easily acknowledged, that we can start to decipher the joy, the atmosphere, the feeling. So my thought is to take it further. What if she becomes an anchor that we then are invited to travel around because of her? And using the lettering, using key things to start pulling us in different directions. And then what if, and just, I'm shooting from the hip here, and it's important that I say this, like, this isn't me saying you've done anything wrong. This is me saying, here are the threads you can follow to take the work even further. Because I think when it comes to compositing, far too often people get caught up in, it's like Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So just because you can put a whole bunch of stuff together in the way that you did doesn't mean that you should. If she becomes an anchor point, we have certain key elements like wording, guitars, instruments that let us know the environment, the feeling, the emotion. But what if it travels where subliminally we start to make out a music note of some kind? We start making out a stanza, something that lets us have that Fibonacci sequence kind of feeling, where we look at this and go, oh my gosh, like the whole thing is literally designed around one idea of music, which of course it is. But what more can we drive here is, again, just shooting from the hip. And so we're back to the beginning. And does that make sense, John?
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. And again, I want to stress, this is beautiful on its own. But this is the joy of compositing, because what can we do that not only lets the audience anchor, but then as they travel, all of a sudden they take a step back and go, oh my gosh, this is a treble clef. That was a word I couldn't get. The whole thing is, whether, and it doesn't have to literally be a treble clef, but if there is some exposure adjustment layers used in here to darken a little bit, so that you've got a little bit of a brighter area that just happens to be this little ghost image of that symbol, it's one direction, again, in a conceptual piece like this, where we can put things together to really start going for it. So key takeaways from looking at this: impact and story. so very present. What do you feel here? Why would you go here? Why did you make this? And what do you want the audience to take with them? Where do we need to look? And let us find where we need to look quickly and easily so that we can then take in the story at our pace the way we want to. Same thing. Where do we need to look? But also respects for light. This one would be another great one to look at from the perspective of lighting, because, and again, not to alter your piece, but if we think about paying, and it's not about technical precision, it's not about following the rules of physics and actual light, but from the idea that we know that it's brighter up here and darker down here, that gives us a whole opportunity of lighting through this experience to start telling other elements of stories that we may not see. You know, Ariel down at the bottom hanging out with Goldfish and Sebastian and whoever else. We may not see the shark that's hiding somewhere and so forth, because we have the opportunities with light and color to be able to tell that. So that's, you know, the directions that we go further. Same thing here with lighting and working with that. And I know we're at our break time.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's maybe if you find a good spot, take about a 5-10 minute break. Does that work? So just because I'm Dr. Literal, it's 7:57. So if you wanted everyone to be back in your seats at, say, 8:07, 10 minutes, kind of a stretch your legs, potty break, refill your water, beer, wine, whatever. Go from there. Does that sound good?
Good. See you in a few.
All right.
Cool.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. I'm going to turn off my camera so I can go check on my nugget.
And if anybody just wants to stick around, yeah, unmute, turn your cameras on, have a chit chat, socialize, talk about, like, I'm kind of blown away by just his whole presentation at this point. I've in fact, while he was talking, I went ahead and ordered that the book by Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey, because the impact and story to his composites, that's really the key to it. And yeah, I'm looking to go
Good
into
luck
this
with
more.
good luck with reading that.
I'm hoping it's a picture book.
Yeah.
So,
No,
oh,
it's a very wordy book.
ooh, words.
Words.
Wow, I've got my edible crayons, so maybe that'll help.
That will help.
All right, I'm gonna go refill my water, but feel free to chit chat, talk.
if anybody's still here, I was uh, unceremoniously booted out of the baby's bedroom because he's sleeping. And I was told if I woke the baby that you all wouldn't have anybody left to present for the rest of the evening.
What's the baby's name again? Dave?
Sebastian.
Sebastian. Okay.
So
Is that a
he's
family name?
no, so I so my wife, about 4 months in the pregnancy, we started talking about names, and she had a list of names, and as she went through them, his initially he was going to be called Parker, and that name was on the list. And I was doing dishes at the time, and in our kitchen, I love to cook, and so I just pretended it was alive, and I was like, "Hey, Parker, get in here and help do the dishes." And I looked at my wife and went, "Yeah, Parker, that's it. I like Parker." But even though it was on her list, it just didn't settle with her very well. And she kept saying that she wanted a name that had more pomp and circumstance. Then she looked up the etymology of Parker, and it literally means to take care of a park. And she's like, "That's not good enough. We need a name with more pomp and circumstance." And I said, "Okay, that's fine." And um, I had wanted to tell my mother the baby's name on Christmas Day. My father passed away in May of 2018, and the holidays are always tough for everybody, but mainly her. They were married for 60 years, and so I said, it'll make her happy to have that name. Well, my wife kept getting more and more anxiety about trying to pick a name, and she's like, "I don't want to pick one. I don't want to pick one." And so Christmas Day came and went, and we didn't have a name, and my mother was fine waiting. So I said to my wife, I'm like, "Look, until you make up your mind, I'm going to officially call our son Cletus von Thunderbush Byrd." And so I started calling him that on social media. And thanks to my job and career, I have several folks that follow me. So everyone knows my son is Cletus von Thunderbush. And they started sending gifts to our house addressed to Cletus von Thunderbush. So the UPS folks come to the door and they love to meet me because they don't leave it at the door. They ring the doorbell because they'll either send it to me, because I mistakenly one night to my students referred to myself as Lord Byrd. It said Lord Byrd, ruler of Mayberry, because I named our house Mayberry. And so now I get packages sent to me by UPS that I open the door and they're like, "Are you Lord Byrd, ruler of Mayberry?" I'm like, "Mm-hmm. Do you have a person living here named Cletus von Thunderbush Byrd?" I'm like, "That's my son." So, but then
That's awesome.
she went through some of the other names, and Sebastian, it was that or Oscar. And I said he cannot be named after a statue or a hot dog, so he has to be called Sebastian. And
So he's named after a lobster in a Disney movie.
exactly. And it's her favorite movie too. So that's what I tell everybody, is that he's named after
See, I went to Sebastian Bach.
and I like that too. And he certainly has a proclivity of making a lot of sound. So maybe
So, yes.
he might be a musician. Who knows? I mean,
There you go. I think that works much better.
we were just discussing this the other day, that for the first time, I'm like, what do I push my son to be? Like, I don't want to push him to be anything, but like, what if he's like, "Well, Dad, I want to be a photographer. I need to use all of your gear." I'll be like, "It's mine. Go buy your own." Like, no, can't have my camera. Go play the piano, make money, draw Disney stuff. Anyway, just kidding. He's a cute little kid. He really is. He's and we just had our 1 month at the pediatrician, and she assured this nervous father, "Your son is normal. This is all normal." I'm like, "But he cries when you like take the bottle out of his mouth." And she's like, "Don't you cry when they take the beer out of your mouth?" I'm like, "But that's different." Anyway,
David, I got to tell you, this program is absolutely stellar.
thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to give it my highest form of praise. It doesn't suck.
I am flattered and honored. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think we have the same cut from the same cloth as far as that level of praise is concerned. So thank you. I do appreciate it. Thank you. It's, I know compositing is hard, and I know that our jobs are hard regardless. And it's, there is such a magical world and a wonderful feeling when you can, you know, and Rex backed me up on this. Like you can make a whole world of dragons and have them fight and tell a whole story, and that story tells another one and another one and another one, and it's never ending, and it gives me a reason. You know, when I'm out driving and I see a beautiful sunset, I always have a camera in the car. Well, not during the summer, but anyway, and I will take pictures of these elements, and while I'm there looking at that sunset, looking at how the shadows are playing across the desert, I will start seeing visions and stories, and compositing enables me to take something as simple as a sunset. I'm not a landscape photographer, but turn it into artwork that can tell a story and have impact to others. And I think everybody should composite. It's a blast. Again, head swaps or dragons, doesn't matter. Shit, I mean, put a dragon's head on somebody, like the mother of the bride that pissed you off the entire wedding day. I mean, it's true. She was the dragon, so might as well give her the dragon's face. Everybody, Bueller.
Before you jump back into it, I just want to apologize to everybody for my poor attempt at emulating Anne Marie and her job of moderating. By all means, if anybody has any questions, feel free to, like David said earlier, interrupt them or throw them up in the chat. He's monitoring it as well as Rex and I. And I feel bad for being so silent. I've just been enthralled in absorbing what you're conveying, the message. It's very, Andrew texted me earlier, no one's ever presented like you and telling the journey. And I'm just wowed. So
thank you.
And to echo Bob, this doesn't suck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
No, absolutely a great class.
thank
Great
you.
presentation.
Yeah.
And yes.
Thank you. I'm gonna blush. I don't know what to
And
say.
I'm really happy to have you as a new member as well, and get
yeah.
to
So
get
feel
to
very
meet you.
fortunate and lucky to have you in our membership. So.
And thank you. I you know, as I was telling Rex and Dave earlier that you know, and I said at the beginning, but it's fun. It sounds cheesy, but it's fun to be in a collective of people that make art for a living, you know, or hobby or passion or whatever it is. Like, it's just a blast to do. And I learn more now by picking up every bit of wisdom I can from anybody, regardless of your experience level, regardless. And I tell people that, like, and when I'm blessed to meet people at conferences and whatever, and they come up and they talk to me like I'm some 80-foot tall fire breathing elf that they've got to worship to. And I'm like, dude, I'm human. I stink. I'm wearing the same clothes since yesterday. And I'll start talking to them. They'll give me information about something that they just learned that I didn't know. And they'll think that's the coolest thing in the world that I learned from them. We all learn from each other. Like, there are things that every one of you can teach me. And that is why we're here. Like, that's everything. And I love that this exists. And I wish I would have joined sooner. I don't want to go too far into this, but I am no longer affiliated with PPA on the national level, and I won't compete anymore in the IPC. And that's, no knock against it. I don't want to derail anybody from being a part of that. I don't want to trash it. It's just my choice. But to know that there's a group of folks here, especially with some of the support that you can get from PPA, I think it's wonderful. So I'm happy to be a part of the group as well. And I just suck into zilch. That's nice. Julia came to my workshop in February of 2000.
Yeah, before the world took a dump.
Yes. So thank you so much. And you and I talked about this a long time ago, and then, you know, the world turned upside down. So thank you, because I just read your comment and take his class and so forth. Thank you. I'm going to be starting the workshops up back very soon. Just trying to make sure that, you know, nobody's going to get sick. So
I'm just glad that you're here and that you agreed to do this for us, because this has been fantastic.
Cool.
Kudos.
Okay, well, stop telling me I'm nice and let's talk about Photoshop. All right, wait, you can't see my screen anymore because I stopped sharing it. There we go. Okay, so I want to talk about some of the I'm going to take you through some of my composites, and I, of course, show you how they were built and so forth, and hitting on some of the key elements that I want to talk about. But before we do that, I want to go back to here. That's my stock folder, by the way. I buy a lot of stock from Adobe, and I shoot a lot of my own stock. One of the things I just want to briefly go through is movie posters. Movie posters, again, if you're starting and trying to get into composites and trying to figure out, again, that same sense of direction, trying to figure out the hero's journey, like movie posters are literally, because they're the one chance that the creators of the film have to tell you what you're about to see. And in the same regard, a movie poster is the same lifeline you have with your image competition work, that you've got one shot to try to communicate some of the elements of what's going to happen. Now, arguably, a movie poster is much more busy than you would probably want to have an image comp image, but you can get a lot of information from there. How colors are put together, competing colors, contrasting colors, how the feeling of cold and so forth communicates this idea that we know is going to take place within, assuming you've seen The Empire Strikes Back, and how like the ominous character that's fading in the distance, and how ultimately these are these little elements of story that you can start to infuse into the piece and find ways to start pushing some of that feeling to it. One of the strong things right now that I'm working with some of my students on is how to separate the idea of portraits and art. So they'll show me a high school senior. I'm going to throw one of my friends under the bus. He's been working on this really well. He sent me an image of a young lady who's a hockey player, and a lot of his work is flat and presentational, and camera eye level at this young lady. And this picture he sent to me, he got up on a step stool and shot down at her and had her bring the hockey stick up toward camera, similar to the gun that I had in that one piece. And he was like, hey, I'm breaking that fourth wall. I'm raising my angle. What do you think? So I felt bad, but I always tell the truth. And I was like, hey, I applaud the fact that you're changing those angles. I applaud the fact that you're trying to find a new way to tell the story instead of that flat presentational. But this is true in photography, it's true in composites. When the viewer and the audience is positioned above somebody looking down, we are in authority, we are in power. So if we're looking down at them, they are less than us. They are weaker than us. So here's this tough ass hockey player with a hockey stick, but she's pointing it up toward the camera. It looks more like she's trying to attack him and knock him away, and doesn't have any kind of position of authority and power. Then he showed me an image that he tossed away and didn't think it was good enough, where he was laying down on the ground, shooting up the stick toward her, and she's looking down at us. And I was like, that one, that's the story. She has the power because the audience and the camera is low and we have to look up. So in the same regard, like, I love this poster because, yeah, we know the story of what's going on with Captain America immediately. You know the feeling of what's going on immediately. Both muted colors that happen to be in that teal and orange flavoring, which is prevalent in color grading for film. But the profile shot, the lack of the eye and so forth, this is a part of that library of imagery that I was talking about. So that no matter what fantasy character you photograph, get all those action shots of Cap looking right at you, looking studly and hot and whatever, but then get those profile shots, get the shots where they're looking away. Again, with movie posters, you have to have varying, and John, this goes for you too, like that you have to have the varying elements that keep our interest throughout the piece. But we need to know that we don't go right here and look at this. We have to look here first, and we have to connect here. Now, I use this as an example because, to the God's honest truth, is since the first time I saw this poster, I don't ever go here. I go right there, because at the contact level here in this top middle third, we have something that, yes, is right at that perimeter of the left third, but it's so close, it's pulling focus. So no matter how flashy everything else is, it pulls too much focus. So one of the key things, again, is looking at how we position elements into the composites that let us have the story and move right to it. This one, it all about colors, but again, that idea that we're getting some characters looking off, none of them are making contact with us. So when you want to start getting into that realm of more movie poster like work and so forth, which I recommend everybody does at some point, just because it's fun, then you're able to start seeing how the color palettes work together in this, how nobody's looking at the camera. Thanos is an afterthought, the bad guy in the distance, and how it all can work to communicate story and feeling, and how very different it is between these two. Because now, who's the only person that's looking at us? And that is an afterthought. So to me, and maybe it makes me sound like a frou-frou artist jerk off, when I look at all of this, I'm like, wow, all these cool characters, and I'm like, whoa, Thanos is looking at me. Like, oh, don't look at me. You know, I don't want you to see me. I want to be able to take it in without being observed. This is my favorite movie poster of all time. Empire Strikes Back is my favorite film besides Star Trek 2 and other movies, because this thing about the story, that you know that you're not going to see a typical action adventure Batman Cape Crusader story here. Look at how little is in this, but how impactful it is to know the madness of this character and this threat. This goes into portraiture, this goes into composite work, this goes into creating art. Like, this impact is so moving to me, that feeds into this one. This movie, by the way, is if you have not seen it, it's a hard movie to watch, but it is a fantastic movie. It's a hard movie to watch because it really dives deep into human mental health, but it's a great movie. He definitely deserved the Academy Awards that he got. Anyway, again, the pure joy of it, but look at the impact of color. So we know exactly where to look. There's no longer any worry, because that's a luminant spot that could pull focus right there. Doesn't matter. Everything is so neutral. We're pulled right into him right there. Same thing here. We're pulled in by color. We're pulled in by displacement, but we're pulled in by color. So another wonderful example. We are the most powerful character ever known to exist, but we're looking down at him, right? So we're in the position of power, but he's literally flying above the earth. So he's looking down at everybody else. We get to be a part of his story, even above it now, because it's no longer a question of who's most powerful here in the feeling and impact. We are a silent observer of somebody who is literally above everybody else. That has weight to it. That has story to it. In the same way that, John, you can cleverly work images together into a treble clef. And same thing, scary people in the background, superheroes in the middle, color palette needs to be the same. So movie posters are a great source of inspiration for compositing. Now, where did I want to start? Progression of story. So I like to make series, short little stories, generally in 3 to 4 images. And this is a composite. She was photographed in the studio. It's a 3D little thingy, stone wall, and then clouds that I shot myself. So going back to The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. I'm not expecting everybody to go to this level of intensity when you want to start creating your composite artwork, but I ask you to at least consider it once. I ask you to sit down, and I know finding free time for all of us is difficult, but sit down for an hour and write down some of the primary emotions that you have felt this past year, because boy, have we all been through a lot, right? Write down the feelings you felt. Positive, negative doesn't matter. Just write down the feelings and start seeing how one feeling can be a trigger or an inciting incident for the story to begin. I got caught off in traffic and I was mad. Where does the story go from there? I lost my job and there were no PPP loans or whatever. You know, where does that take you? So in this case, the model and I were having a discussion. This was a traveling dress that I got to work with and photograph, and so I brought her in for it. But we were having a discussion because we were being respectful to her. We were talking about age, and that her age being what it is, and female models aging out to a degree. So we're trying to come up with a narrative. She's an actor, by the way, and we're coming up with a narrative, and I love working with actors. And I said, hey, you know what? Here's a simple story. You're one of 3 sisters. We all know this story, right? You're one of 3 sisters. The prince come to select his bride, and it's going to be you because you're the eldest, you're the wisest, you're the next in line, and all that kind of stuff. And he gives a wonderful, beautiful bouquet of flowers to you, hands them to you, and asks you to hold all the ones that he doesn't want, which is the purple flower, and he gives all the beautiful flowers, the rest of the bundle, to your younger sister, the ingenue, the beautiful. So he pulls that like, nope, you're not good enough. Gives it over, not realizing that the reason why you're the eldest and the most wise is because you have a secret that your sisters don't share, which is you have a power that they don't have. You have something inside of you that they don't have. So we put the narrative together. The other 2 images aren't finished, but essentially it's her getting the bundle of flowers and smiling. And then Ellie does a great job and looks at camera like, excuse me, what? And then this is the 3rd frame where they've all walked away. She's got her token little prize given to her by her Prince Charming. And then she decides to destroy it and use that anger and that hatred and destroy this little symbol, this little object. This is a simple story that was derived from us having a conversation about aging out. These kinds of stories are easy to create when you look at that hero's journey circle. That same story, it's Cinderella. It's these kinds of stories, you can't reinvent the wheel anymore at this point. And all of them are going to start borrowing bits and pieces from each other. So take the time to write down some of those emotions, take the time to write down characters that they could fit. And how could you put that together into a piece of artwork? Whether it goes into image competition or not is irrelevant. You're making art that is connected to you, that tells a story about you. And that cannot be any better reason to create it than that, in my opinion. So I can show you tools and so forth, but one of the things that I really want to kind of explore, and I'm happy the kid's sleeping, so I'm happy to go as long as we need. I want to make a composite with you to talk about a couple of key things. That is an issue that I see a lot with entry-level work. So we're going to take this picture of my friend Danielle, shot in the studio. I commonly use gray paper. I'm not a fan of green screen at all. I know that Ben Shirk has a series of actions that will try to decontaminate the color from green screen. I've never used them, and I've heard some folks say that they work well. I know for like high volume sports, using green screen is the best alternative from an efficiency perspective. And I certainly would recommend it at that point. But I like to use gray because if you don't know, the light will hit the green, it'll come back, it brings the color temperature with it. So you'll get color contamination all over your subject. And there is an option in Photoshop to decontaminate that color during the select and mask dialog. And I do not recommend using that because Photoshop literally desaturates the image and that it looks bad. So I shoot on gray paper. I light my images and stories for the mood that they create. In my opinion, there is no right way, quote unquote, to light for a composite. You can use 1 light, you can use 15, just depends on what your vision is. I do recommend trying to use your key light as the main light source that you envision in your picture. So if it's the sun, that's tough because the sun generally is behind your subject. So then you would use a key light as you would a photographer to get the proper exposure and see the subject, but that's where that second light can come into play. Put an orange CTO gel onto it, and now you have a light source that's kicking the subject from behind that will mimic the light source in your composite. Some of the best composite work and it's stuff that I'm trying to do right now is only using 1 light and letting that 1 light be, so like if it is a sun, then using that big light behind the model and not lighting them properly from the face, but using flats or reflectors to try to put some of that light back in so that the photography is that much more real to the scene. But I'm going to bring her in to each of these pieces of stock. But before I do that, let's look at them. So these are both identical rendered 3D pieces of stock that I purchased from Adobe a long time ago. The key difference here is where the camera was positioned when they were rendered. So this one, the camera is low. We got a wider angle. The pedestals here, much bigger, closer to camera, fall away. So we can tell at the horizon line here, you can tell how things fall into the center, how big they are, where we are positioned as an audience with this piece. Versus this one, camera's up higher because things are not as big. There's not as much of distortion. They're still falling in a little bit. Horizon line's a little bit higher. So we know the perspective angle of where the camera is. This is one of the first key elements that is often overlooked in compositing. Where to look, where the audience needs to look, but then the perspective angle itself. And when you start working with composites, you'll feel it. Trust me, you'll do it and you'll feel it and you'll go, wait, something's wrong. Which is why I said this piece has a huge error. So can anybody tell me what the error is?
The perspective angle, because you're looking essentially up at Batman, but the balcony where he's on is falling down away.
Yep. So I shot this way early in my career. That's my excuse. I thought it would be really cool to get a picture of Batman. So I'm laying down on the ground, shooting up his foot. Then I couldn't find stock of a balcony to save my life. So I found this one and I was like, you know what? Maybe nobody will notice. So the perspective angle of the balcony does not match him. The city doesn't match him because the city is flat and presentational. The moon's flat and presentational. The only thing I did right in this was the key light that I used on him is the moon. And then I used the second light over here that has no source indicated anywhere in the composite. I did try to paint in realistic highlights on top and then shadows so that the moon, I thought I was pretty fancy doing that many years ago. So it's these little things, going back to what I was talking about with John's piece, it's these little things. Does it make it a bad composite? No, but if these little elements can be improved upon, then you can take it further. And not only does the piece become stronger, your continued artwork will become stronger because you start paying attention to where is this light source on his cape. It's not indicated in the piece at all. So either needs to be painted out or something needs to be brought in. There's orange light right next to it, but that's far away. These buildings are still in focus, but he's in focus. They should not be. That depth, they're out of focus. It belies the depth, implies the depth. Here, none of the lighting matches to her. The lighting matches here. The feeling and the overspill of the color and the light matches in a way that it just doesn't here. And of course, throwing the title graphic Supergirl at the bottom, I was impressed just because I could. Here, we don't need that. We know who it is. 3 pieces: rocks, model, and sky. So finding ways to create artwork that doesn't have to be complex. Back to the Photoshops. So am I low to the ground? Am I at eye level on Danielle? I'm actually squatting just a little bit in the shot because I did not want to be at eye level, but I did not want the power of being all the way down to the ground. I wanted us to be just a little bit lower than her so she could look past our heads without looking right past the top of my head. When I'm photographing, I tell models all the time, look at my shoulders or look past my bald spot on my head, because I don't want them looking really far anywhere else because the audience can't connect to them. So if I bring her into this piece and resize her, first I'm paying attention to the lighting. So the lighting clearly is traveling in from document left and coming across. So the key light here is reflecting all of that. So the lighting has to match. which is a fundamental element of compositing. You'd be surprised. It is one that it can be hard to see every error that can happen that way as you're building the stock. She doesn't fit the scene because the perspective is way, way off. But if we grab her and put her into one, she does fit the perspective. So it can seem like a minor thing, but this is so absolutely essential when you go on the journey of finding stock images, which I recommend places like Adobe Stock. Pexels, PEXELS.com is a free site that's royalty free. They're JPEGs. They're generally low quality and they're not curated very well. Adobe Stock does a wonderful job of curating their artwork. You can get some decently sized files, but Adobe's pricing plan is a little, trying to think of a nice word. It's convoluted is what I can say. So enter at your own risk. So perspective angle makes a huge difference. And this is a balance that once you see it, you kind of can't unsee it. Now, there used to be great ways in the past to figure out how to see the perspective angle. I'm setting up my tablet real quick. If you don't use a Wacom pen tablet or any kind of pen tablet for artwork in Photoshop, that's okay. It does take time and it's a learning curve, but I absolutely strongly recommend a pen tablet because of one simple thing. We are prone since the day we start learning to write to use one of these to fine tune, do stuff. We cannot use one of these to do that. So I strongly recommend using a pen tablet. But you used to be able to, and I don't think it's as applicable anymore as it used to be. Do all off the screen. But you used to be able to look at the angle of their shoulders and kind of get an idea of where that needs to meet up and match to the overall horizon line. In this case, with that tilt, part of this, we now have the option to potentially go like this. Does that make sense? Because we're looking at how her shoulders are tilted, and then we can kind of flow with that. Now, I think that looks a little disjointed and a little weird. So you work with it until you get to a place that makes sense. And does it kind of have the same feeling? Does it not? So those are one of the ideas that you can start fluctuating with when you're looking at perspective angles and how people fit into the scene. But I go back. To me, I stopped using those kinds of gimmicks of drawing lines and so forth and trying to find the horizon lines. I simply started placing them into the scene and looking at how does it feel? How does it connect? Does this feel right compared to this one? And even though it's cool, as I look at the back of her dress that's resting on paper, but it's floating in air here, it just doesn't make sense. But here it's resting on the ground. So those little subtle giveaways will help you to find that perspective. Now, the only other major thing we need in this composite is a shadow. So there are two types of shadows. The first one I call a grounding shadow. Make sure that I'm on the right brush. Go. So a grounding shadow to me is painting on a blank layer, painting at 100% opacity and flow. And all I'm going to do is make a hard little shadow everywhere where it makes sense. And I paint this in by hand. Now notice that let me zoom in a little bit more. I didn't paint in through here because this is where you got to kind of start paying attention to the curve of, or the way light actually moves. So in this case, we would not see a shadow here if the light's traveling from camera left across, but we would see it back through here in these areas. So I paint in a grounding shadow anywhere where we need to see it. And now I'm being just a little bit rough for purposes of video. maybe just a touch of one right there. Also, pen tablets have pressure sensitivity inside of them. So the lighter that I touch the pen to the tablet, the lighter it interacts with the tools in Photoshop. So another reason why you should use a pen tablet. And then I'll stop talking about it. Switching my flow to 10% by hitting Shift and the number 1. Hotkeys in Photoshop will save your life. So we have our grounding shadow, which is very minimal, but we need one. And then the second, always on a second layer. B for brush, right and left bracket keys to make the brush bigger or smaller. I always paint at 100% opacity, and I change my flow constantly. For anybody who doesn't know, I'm going to give you this brief explanation because it's the best way I've ever heard it described. If you take a paint bucket with a paintbrush and you take the paintbrush and dip it all the way down into the paint bucket so that the bristles are completely covered in paint and pull it out, that's 100% opacity. And if you take that same paintbrush with all that paint, mash it into the canvas, go like this and go crazy, that's 100% flow. If you take the paintbrush and barely dip it into the can and pull it out, which is a little bit of paint on the brush, that's 10% opacity. Then you take that same paintbrush, that little bit of paint, mash it into the canvas as hard as possible, that's 100% flow. I want all the paint all the time. I just want to control the flow of it and how much is put down so I can build it up as I go. So changing my flow to 10%, probably going to go to 5 by hitting Shift, 0, and 5. And now just making shadows that imply the direction of the light. They're harder at the body and then fade away as we travel. Find a little one right there, maybe. Not in front, obviously, because we don't need, but a little harder one right there going. Now, we have shadow, we have composite, we have problems. The column is in front of her, but we just painted a shadow over it. So these are these little fine-tuning things that I was talking about with John's work as well as anybody. So erase the shadow off the pillar because it shouldn't be there, because we're paying attention to the actual feeling and physics of how the light is traveling. Now, we have a realistic shadow, we have the grounding shadow. What is the next thing we can do that is something I've talked about that continues the realism of this piece that forgives the photography? Who was the 7th president of the United States? I don't know. So when I shot this, I have my big 45-inch Octa here. And then I have a parabolic over here that's just throwing a little bit of fill back in for those wings, essentially. So there's 2 lights. If I was actually shooting for this stock, there's only 1 light source. So yes, there is reflection that's coming off the columns and so forth, and it could throw some light back into it, but not enough to where it is. So this is another level of realism that if you spend some time really just kind of analyzing the work, rather than adding more elements to it, start here. So like John's work with the ocean piece, beautiful. There's so many things to look at, and I love looking at it. But is it better to start there with learning the complexity of adding so much to fit story and impact and to keep the audience's attention? Or is it better to go for the artwork to make it as real as possible? So in this case, what I want to do is use an exposure adjustment layer that is clipped to Danielle, so it will only affect her. And I'm going to drastically reduce the exposure and the output. Then convert the mask to a hide all or black mask, paint white on it to reveal it. I'm going to change my flow of my brush to 1%. I often paint at 1%. And I'm going to start painting in all those shadows on the back side of her dress. Because this part of the dress down here with all this heavy shadow, but it has that much light added to it, it's not real. So if I paint in shadows, I'm going to go to 10% for purposes of video. It's really ugly, so I'm going to 5%. Paint it on her back through here a little bit, these back of these wings, maybe her arm. her hand just a touch, but keep it off of her thumb because her thumb is just enough in front of her body that it'll pick up some of the light. Get back through here, maybe on this side of her hair, just a little bit on her face. Top of the wings will get the light, but not this body part of it. Maybe feather it out just a touch. And let it be just a touch more real with light and shadow. So that it becomes more real. She's connected. These are the fine tunings that makes composites work. Seeing the light, seeing how it travels, knowing what needs to be realistic and what isn't. When I see people create composites that their feet will be next to shadows and will be implying that this area is dark, but the actual feet aren't. So paint some shadows into it, because we have to overcome the photography if we want to make the composites have realism. I'm going to close this one so I can see what I'm doing. Another wonderful, and again, I'm kind of like throwing a lot at you now and spitballing here, but throwing out these different segments here. But again, with the lighting, the next thing that we need to look at is unification to the piece itself. And this is where color grading comes into play. One of the fastest ways in any composite to unify the whole thing. You have varying elements of stock, right? You've got your background, you've got your person and so forth. You're looking at lighting and you're paying attention to lighting. And there's some more complex ways that you can look at light and see where the deepest shadows are in the stock and then try to match everything to it. And that's something I can show at a later time. But the next thing to do is this, she doesn't match this. There's different textures in the background. There's a different feeling there versus what she is. Does she need more grain and noise on her face versus what we see in the background? Do we need to add more lights and effects? The fastest way to unify the whole thing is to use color. So we have blues and teals. We have oranges, browns. Essentially the color wheel, blue and orange are opposite each other in the color wheel, which is why they're used all the time in film for color grading. So my favorite way to unify any piece is to use a solid color adjustment layer. And I pick a color that's in the scene. So I'm going to go with that blue and then change to blending modes. The most powerful thing in Photoshop to me is layers. Second most powerful thing in Photoshop are layer blending modes. And the third most powerful thing in Photoshop are layer masks. Those three things are everything in Photoshop. So if you don't know what a layer mask is, you don't know how to use it, you haven't explored the layer blending modes and understand why they work, then I strongly encourage you to go on that journey because it's well worth it. So this is a blending mode of light in which I often will use with deeper colors because it's going to attempt to lighten all of the deepest points within the image using the color and traveling its parity between it. So I'm going to reduce this to like 30-ish%. Then I'm going to add another one, solid color. Let's go with another orange because again, that's in that scene. Go to lighten, see what that one looks like. Changing the fill. I'm going to go to soft light. Yeah, there we go. Experimentation is the key to invention. Now I want to do one more thing. I'm going to add. No, I'm going to do it the easy way. I'm going to make a composite layer of everything. So the topmost active layer, I'm going to hit Control, Alt, Shift, and E for everything, or Command, Option, Shift, and E on a Mac. Then take this layer into Adobe Camera Raw as a filter. Again, if you're not familiar with Photoshop and you use Lightroom a lot, then ACR will be your best friend. So increase the highlights, increase the white point. Oh, I'm sorry, cancel. Duplicate it, then take it into ACR. Add some white, highlights, pull out the shadows a little bit more, pull down the contrast just a little bit, increase the black point. This is my little cocktail that I love to do for almost every single image. I reduce the contrast in the image. I increase the black point in the image. I increase the white point. And in this case, typically I pull out the highlights. So it's a wonderful way to get an illustrative effect. Pull the highlights down big time, push the white point up. And you get a really cool illustrative effect by simply reversing these two. There's a weird threshold that will happen when you go too far. And I'm trying to find it on this one, but it's not going to happen on this one. But sometimes you'll get this weird result that's can be pretty neat, but it can also look like too psychedelic for my taste. There we go. Pull the contrast out, pull the shadows out. Pulling shadows out is big time. Shadows pulling out will give you the illustrated look like that. And then hit OK. So I can now use a hide all mask and bring that in and pay attention again to the realism. I can paint it in on this side of her face that's got all that bright lights. I'm on a flow of 5%. I'm going to go fast with a 10. Let me select her so I'm not painting the background. Let's go 30%. And she becomes more dynamically interesting because we're paying attention to highlight and shadow, and because we have color grade. By using the colors that we see, they unify everything together immediately. So the takeaway is, again, where does the audience look? Does the perspective match of whatever stock you're putting into play? Does the perspective support the story and the impact? Then start adding in realistic shadows and highlights. Don't worry about textures, sparks, laser beams. That stuff can come in time. Focus on light and shadow. I cannot stress that enough, because it is that some of the best compositors that I follow, their pieces, they can take a flat lit model and use simply curves adjustment layers and hue saturation adjustment layers, and they will make it look like it had been lit anyway to Sunday, because they're using highlight and shadow, and they're using highlight and shadow against each other to create 3-dimension to tell the story. And in the same regard, that can be one of the most powerful elements to a composite, is not how many doodads you can put into it if you pay attention to light and shadow, if you pay attention to color and let it have the impact that it needs to have to tell the story. I think the whole thing needs to be brightened up just a touch anyway. And adjustment layers, they're wonderful, wonderful tools and are the backbone of Photoshop. So final thing that I would do in this is let's add a little bit more light so we know where to look. One of my favorite things, again, from a design perspective, to tell the audience where to look is to use vignettes. I use vignettes constantly in my work. My favorite way to make a vignette is to use a solid black adjustment, solid color adjustment layer that's black, and then put it on a blending mode of soft light. Then on the layer mask that comes with it, I use the gradient tool. So G for gradient. Why am I not going to the gradient tool? And then I use the radial gradient. Make sure that you're on the basic tab here where it's foreground color to transparency. In this case, I need it to be black to transparency. So this option here on the radial gradient, and then I do an opacity of 30%. And I just travel across the image, making sure I hit her first. And then I do a big one to level it out just a little bit. And that drives us in. So we have to look at her. Yes, we have hot light sources here and here, but if we've done our job with brightness and contrast adjustment layers, curves adjustment layers, processing the file in Adobe Camera Raw the right way the first time, or doing the photography right the first time. If I would have used a hotter light on her to match the stock, it would have fit, but I had to make it up as I went in Photoshop. We have a composite. And who is she? Where does she come from? Where is she going? What does she represent? Like, what is the justice here? What is the story here? What's next for her, and what can I create beyond that? That's Danielle, by the way, when she's not playing an angel. If nobody's heard, excuse me, of the quick selection tool, then if you haven't, there's no, let's assume Rex just raised his hand and said, I have no idea what the quick selection tool is. Thank you, Rex. I appreciate that so much.
Nice.
You win a free roll of paper from Savage. Anyway, so the quick selection tool is the best tool to use for any type of compositing work, even if you just want to add a texture to the background. It is a learning tool. It is one that will learn quickly. Now, thanks to Skynet, we have this button here that says select subject. And in 2020 and 2021, Skynet is straight up real and will find anything in your photo. Like it creeps me out how good it is. So select subject, you click it, and it's going to do a damn near perfect job of selecting Danielle. And it did. Like it missed these little strands, and some of her sweater, but so be it. It's gray paper, and she happens to be wearing a sweater with a gray shoulder piece on. So using select subject definitely can be the way to go. But I like using the quick selection tool because I'm old school. Get off my lawn. So I use it in additive mode so that this little button with the plus sign means that as I start tapping and dragging, it's adding to the selection. The reason why I like to use the quick selection tool is because it learns as it goes. So it's looking at all the pixel data and figuring out what you want. Apparently my Photoshop is running really slow now, naturally. Oh, and Cletus Von Thunderbush letting his mother know that it's time for more ounces. Anyway, so it's running slow, but trust me, it would do a better job. I like using the quick selection tool when I'm doing compositing where I'm working with different elements, because once I get through 3 or 4 passes, let's pretend this is a good selection. Then I'm going to come into the next dialogue, which is select and mask. Because it went through the process, and I got this from Juliana Cost, because it went through the process of Adobe Sensei, went through the process of learning by every one of those brush strokes I was doing with the quick selection tool, the select and mask dialogue is actually stronger and you'll get better results. So if you're not familiar with this dialogue here, let me hit cancel because that's just an atrocious selection. So let's let Skynet do its job. So to get to select subject, you can either hit the W key, which will take you to the quick selection tool, or you come up to select and then down to subject. So click it, ignore that message, and it'll think, and then it'll find her. Now we go to select and mask. And hopefully some of you haven't seen this, so I'm not boring into tears. This is the most powerful part of the quick selection process. And this is where you can get yourself about 85% of the way to extracting somebody. And again, this is applicable for any type of photography by using this dialogue. So breaking it down really quickly, this is the key tool you'll want to use. It's the Refine Edge brush tool. So it's going to look at the selection now and say, let's refine it and get rid of little bits and pieces that he doesn't want. It isn't going to make up a new selection like the quick selection tool would do outside of this dialogue. It's just going to try to refine it. So the little bits of gray through her hair, if I use the Refine Edge brush tool and paint, it'll find most of that and get rid of it. Now, as powerful as AI is, and I love AI, I used to do composites years ago with the magnetic lasso tool and the tragic wand tool. It's not perfect. So yes, it got rid of some of that gray, but all the frizzies that are left, all the haloing and the artifacts that will happen when we export out will cost us more time to repair than simply just leaving that gray and coming up with a more efficient solution, which is to use the clone stamp tool and stamp this hair down over that so that we don't see the background. So some of the things that you have learned over the years in digital photo editing are still more powerful and applicable now, even though we have Skynet that thinks for you. The next part of this dialogue that's absolutely essential first up here, view mode, you can choose how you see. So I've chosen overlay, and then I've picked a color, which is green because I'm biased. And then I've set the opacity to 50% so I can see behind. So if there's anything missing, it will show it to me. So i.e. we can see that it didn't grab this part of the shoulder through this view. But the key element, the most important part, is right here. Edge detection, make sure that smart radius is checked. This lets the AI go even further to refine down the selection. And that's why using the quick selection tool is my preferred method. If I have to go quickly, I will use select subject to save myself some time. But by doing smart radius and setting a radius threshold of anywhere between like 8 and 15-ish pixels, it's going to do a really good job of giving you a realistic edge. Some elements will still be missing, but it's not going to be a feathered, smooth, clean edge. It's going to have issues, and those issues are real, and they make it feel real. The lady that I have been mentoring with for 3D, her greatest piece of advice she gave to me was, when you're creating 3D, everything looks clean. She's like, imperfections, imperfections, imperfections. Add as many imperfections to your 3D renderings as possible because it looks real. And that, I think, is applicable to the quick selection process and extracting people. There should be flyaways. There should be little strands that are out there because that's realistic to the work that we create. So the rest of the dialogue, a little bit of this is self-explanatory. This is the thing I was mentioning way earlier, that you can decontaminate colors right here. I do not recommend that because it desaturates the entire thing around the perimeter. So this dialogue of quick selection, and then select a mask. Make sure you use this smart radius, and radius will give you almost the best extraction that you can hope for with AI. But no matter what, it always requires the human being to step in. So looking at your layer mask itself, I always recommend doing that. Hold Alt or Option and click the layer mask, and you'll be able to see the mask itself. So you can see all the little frizzy stuff through here that if we paint white or black, it will reveal it or take it away. And so we can recover some of that stuff there. But then ultimately, we have to clean up the layer mask. And every one of my composites, every piece of artwork I make, I clean up the layer mask by hand. And it is sometimes the thing I spend the most time on, because I want the selection to be as perfect as possible. If I'm going to add a glow around the character, I'm going to add special effects around them. I just got done replacing the sky in an image. I can't go there because I can't show you those folders. Anyway, I had to replace the sky of a model that I photographed at Golden Hour, and the flash died, so I had to overexpose the sky. I had to make that selection so clean in the mask so that all the burned contamination of light where the pixels are dead, I had to clean that up so that when I started painting the edge to get rid of all of that, it looked real. So piece of advice I would give is spend as much time on the layer mask as possible, because it is absolutely essential to have that great selection. And then once you do, the sky's the limit of what you start creating. And we're at 9 o'clock. I'm happy to again keep going. I'm just going to now show you just a few pieces starting at the base. So clouds, some stock that I purchased, photobash.org, I think. It's either, yeah, I think it's .org, Photobash. They are a great site to buy incredibly affordable packs of hundreds of stock images. It was started by an artist that sold the stock images to traditional painters to use the images as references for painting. They have an option for solo licensing and studio licensing, and it's royalty free once you buy the stuff. So I definitely recommend them. So building the world, just putting in some atmosphere into these rocks. I'm a big fan. I'm a J.J. Abrams dude of light flares, and just building up the stages of things that made sense. This is the base of her that I just painted in because I thought, why not? And then brought her into the scene, and then started just adding little effects along the way, adding that shadowing and contouring. These are exposure adjustment layers, hue and saturation adjustment layers, or fire, because every demon needs fire. and then that's the final. And then I did a color grade and artistic enhancement on top of it.
Dave,
So
do you
that-
ever use lookup tables?
Yes, I love LUTs. LUTs are amazing. I use a lot of them, a lot of teal and orange, and then I love essentially the ones that mimic film, because you can get some great luminosity values in there that are kind of hard to replicate with curves. But yeah, LUTs are a wonderful way. I have an action that I created in 2012, and it was my way of developing my first style. And because I would read, oh, this levels adjustment layer can do this, and so I would make an action to replicate what I read so that I wouldn't forget it. And then I started putting all these little tips and tricks into one action that became a style. Every year I evolve that action and change colors and change elements into it so that it creates the look that I put on top of things. And LUTs are like my fast way of getting a quick proof to a client, and then I'll run my action on top of it once it's been approved. This one, again, cosplayer that does a lot of wonderful charity work. Started with Adobe. I got rid of the building. I purchased this from Adobe stock, some shadows for the cars, 3 different cars. I had never actually seen the Deadpool movies, and told a little fib to him. I'm like, oh yeah. He's like, that one big action scene where there's car chase and guns and stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, that scene. Cool, yeah. And then I went to Adobe stock and I'm like, car chase, cars, guns, blow up, fire. Then found a bunch of stock to purchase to make him his artwork. But key things like looking at the piece of stock. This is a picture of a car, obviously as a wreck, but simple little things like that exposure adjustment layer that's changing the dynamic of how the light fits. Then adding in the different shadows and so forth that come into play, adding in more orange around the light of the fire, so that once the particle effects are into the piece, everything starts to become believable. And these elements, like when I said earlier, don't worry about adding laser beams and fire and all that kind of crap. Yeah, of course you need to, because as you can see, these 10, 15 layers, they're all just sparks and fire. It's all flashy stuff to look at. But without these layers, does it make sense? There's all this delicious fire around that car, but nothing's lighting it up. So it's those little elements, those little intricacies that if you really want to create great composites, story, impact, and understanding light and shadow, so that you know if you're going to put in a giant fire, it's got to have some kind of color around it. If you are going to put a character into a scene where the strong light source comes in from here, you don't have the corresponding shadows. We're back to here without that. And just those little subtle elements, when they're all put together, make everything believable. This one is a hot mess of glows and so forth. There is a wonderful program. I find every chance I can to mention this. It's called Oniric, ONIRIC. It's by Composite Nation. I strongly recommend it to anybody. I can give you a brief demonstration of it. It doesn't crash the Photoshops. Let's use it on this picture. So I'm going to run Oniric right now. It's made by a young man named Mario Olvera, and it is the best non-destructive way of creating glows and light streaks into images because it picks up on the light. So you hit X-ray and anything in green is what it sees as the strongest light source right now at its threshold here of 0.25. So if I increase the threshold to 1, it's going to see quite a bit. So this is what it sees that it's going to add a glow to. So if I turn off X-ray, it adds a realistic glow that you then have control over its intensity, its radius, how bright it is, and then you can add a light dispersion to it, and you can also colorize it and give it its own color. Oniric is a wonderful tool. I use it in just like the gel glamour beauty work that I do. It is my 2021 equivalent of glamour shots because you can add it just a little bit. And like, I'm old enough that glamour shots, like I had family that went and got glamour shots, and it was glamour shots. But there are people now that they're like, wow, they're such a subtle, beautiful, they're like ethereal glow. And I'm like, glamour shots. Yeah, you like the glamour shots, don't you? So Oniric will give that to you in subtle ways with just regular portraiture. But doing any kind of special effects, any kind of fire, if you're a product photographer and you want realistic light flare off of glass, get Oniric. Oniric is amazing. I have a friend who does commercial work for BMW, and I watched him put together a composite of just a stock car sitting in their studio in their cyc wall. And he brought in the road and everything else, and then he used Oniric on the headlamps and interior lighting. And by the time Oniric was done with it, you could not paint it by hand. It would take you days to do it by hand, and Oniric can do it for you like that. So I definitely recommend Oniric. It's a wonderful program. Again, you can control the intensity and pull some things down. You have masks so that you can paint away and take away what you want and what you don't want and so forth. Wonderful program that I would recommend to any. I cancel to go back into the Photoshop. So that's what I got. Any questions on that thus far?
Blown away, still trying to figure out what I missed.
You guys are putting me on.
No, like several comments of excellence. Your speaking, your presentation is just, you've set a very high bar. I don't know who our next speaker is, but they're in trouble.
Right on. You let them know Lord Byrd was in this house.
Yeah. Well, you remember, maybe you'll be there.
Maybe, yeah, I will. And I'm going to sit here like this the whole time and just be like, I'm just kidding. So the last little thing I'll throw in there, because my wife will punch me in the face if I don't. So, and I did ask Emery about this before, and she said it was okay. So I know when you go to conference and so forth, somebody has something to sell to you, and I hate that you have to listen to the speeches, so I throw it in at the end. I started developing, it's called the Photoshop Composite Series. It's essentially online subscription for a year, where right now there are several chapters of material on there that takes you through the basics of compositing, like teaching you the tools in Photoshop. Every one of them you need to know how to use, and it takes you systemically through it. So it starts with a beginner in mind. So if you know what a layer mask is, then skip that chapter, but it gives you every nut and bolt that you need to know to build the tool set, to understand things like lighting and shadow, perspective angles, all that kind of stuff. And then once you get through those first few chapters, then you get into individual one-off chapters of essentially just characters, where you see the photo shoot, you see the entire Photoshop edit over several different videos and how it's all put together. Most of the chapters have images that you can download. So like, for instance, there's a cosplay characters. So Supergirl and Black Panther, there's a Jedi, there's a video game character in there. And that library of stock, there are extras in the video. So you download the extras, which are the stock images of the characters, stock images of backgrounds that I have made. And then in some of the videos, I utilize stock I've purchased from Adobe. So that's not included for free because you'd have to buy it from Adobe. But essentially you have files to work with. And then every 4 weeks, a new chapter is added to the series. And it's an annual subscription that you would re-up at your 1 year. It's not a calendar year. It's just whenever your year is up. There is a Facebook group that essentially is where I'm going to be putting this community together with this. And it is my intent with the series, obviously, to make money with my knowledge and what I have, but to also be able to provide a place where people can not only learn what I know, but that I can help cultivate that community through using the Facebook group and image competition. So We probably won't have our first image comp until the end of the year once it fully launches, which it has not fully launched. It was set to launch in March of 2020. And then several of my mentors said, no, 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 no. And I was glad that I didn't. So I am now trying to revamp just a few elements of it to clean it up and polish it, and it'll be ready to go. The image competitions, I'm going to have them once a quarter, once the series is live and we have a good enough community. And this is how I believe in it, and this is what I believe about it. So I'm not sponsored by anybody. I'm buying a massive gift card at B&H Photo. So the first giveaway is a Canon R6 or a $2,500 gift card. It's coming out of my pocket because I want people to have access to my education. I want people to learn from me. I want them to give me money for it. And I want them to be able to have a place where they can put their artwork into it. And I do not mean this to sound bad to PPA or anybody else, but I want an image competition that I know is run right, that is run fair, and is run by people who are judging, who should be judging those categories. And that's, again, no knock to anybody else. It's just me stating what is important to me with image comp, and to have real world difference. So the prizes that are there, so that people will put their best efforts into the work. I'm not trying to take over the industry. I'm not trying to take over the world, but I want to place this image comp is not going to be things like weddings and seniors. It's literally going to be composites and fantasy work. But again, it can be derived from the things that you learned in the series. So that series is technically live right now, but I would encourage you not to buy it right now because I'm still trying to fix everything in it. Funny how I almost had that done, and then Sebastian decided to enter into the world. So as soon as that's finished up, that will be there in the future for you all. But in the meantime, I'm always available. So please, I love answering questions. I love trying to help as much as I can. If I don't get back to you right away, it's only because I have too many balls in the air. So, but hit me up on social media, hit me up via email. I'm always happy to help. And go to my YouTube channel. That you can do for free. Go to YouTube and subscribe. There's all kinds of content on there. And there's not a lot of composite content in there because of the composite series. But retouching content, all kinds of stuff is there. So
there's an expression I came up with, Dave, that's for this compositing stuff, creating the reality within the fantasy.
I like that. I like that a lot, because that's what we're doing. You're taking a make-believe world that only exists in your mind. But I mean, I'll be damned if by the time you're done, it's a real world to you, and it will be a real world to others. They'll find elements that's real within it. I mean, hence reality reimagined was I never wanted to call our brands David Byrd Photography. I thought that was pretentious. So I was like, no, it's never about just me. And so, no offense to anybody who calls their business their first and last name in photography. It was just,
hey,
hey, it doesn't suck. I can tell you that. But I like that. I really like that a lot.
Great presentation, Dave.
Thank you.
Absolutely
Thank you very
great.
much.
Now it is time for you to do a Savage Paper giveaway.
Oh crap!
And we also have a Pro Select to give away as well.
Okay, so what are the ground rules on how are we doing this?
We'll do one at a time. On the Savage giveaway, David will ask a question. First person in the chat that answers the correct answer will be the winner.
Okay, so just to
Clarify,
you're going to use the chat function. So get your keyboards ready, and you're going to chat the answer to everyone, not just like Rex or David, but so everyone can see it. And the first person with the correct answer is the winner.
Correct.
Now,
yeah, because the chat is being recorded as well as the video, so we can always go back and make sure.
Hey, you guys have a great night.
Thanks, Bob.
All right, Bob.
Thanks, David.
Nice to meet you, Bob. Thank you so much.
All right. So first up is Savage Paper.
Savage Paper's first one.
David, you got a question ready? Everyone got the keyboards ready.
Okay.
I took some pages of notes so I could.
You cheater. You cheater.
I was
Um,
gonna offer help. I'm not. I don't play to win.
I want to ask a funny question, but I'm not going to. What did I say was the most powerful thing in Photoshop?
Okay,
Go ahead, Rex.
first,
Carl.
so you have the first one is, what's the answer? So you have adjustment layer.
Layers was layers.
So the first one that says layers. Now
I see Larry Olson.
Actually, go
Yeah,
up.
Larry Olson.
Like scroll up. JJ Ellis got adjustment layer.
I'm gonna say adjustment layers are powerful, but I said layers.
Oh, layer.
So
okay.
those are
okay. So
technically
Larry, you're the winner.
Sorry.
Congratulations, Larry.
For
Oh no,
that
no,
paper.
no, no, no. Thanks for
I
clarifying.
trashed John's photos and then I deny him savage paper. I'm sorry, my friend.
Well, he still has.
Oh,
another option.
boo-hoo, boo-hoo.
Yeah.
All right, congratulations, Larry.
Yes, congratulations. I will send while David works on the Pro Select one. Him and the Dave and David. I'm gonna send Larry the code for his paper.
Okay, so David, you got another question, and everybody, keyboards ready?
Oh boy. No, I want to ask this one, but no, I'll ask that one later. Man, because you all said that other things than I can think of. My gosh.
Here, I'll text you one I'm thinking of.
What is the alternate name of my son? That's what I wanted to ask. And if anybody can spell Cletus von Thunderbush, I'll buy you a camera.
Hold on, I'm sending you.
I don't want to be a jerk. I'm trying to think of Andrew got it. What was you? Oh,
that's my suggestion to you.
Oh, hey, smart. What was the first paying job I got making composites?
Oh,
The first job making composites. The first paid composite I got. What was it of? There you go. The Death Star blowing up a church. I think
David
Bob got
Fudge,
it.
Congratulations.
Bob's
Right
overlook?
on.
Yeah, Bob got wedding
David
and
Fudge
church.
won Pro Select. So now we'll get with Julia on that one for the Pro Select. She's got the code, and then we will get that to you. If you have any issues with it, just let me know. So that's cool.
Congratulations,
Hey,
there, Bob.
Who won that? Who won that?
Bob.
Who won that?
Well, actually, I'm going to say Connie.
David.
Yeah, right. We
David Fudge,
another,
Julia.
we need another license of it, so that was great.
The Bob Zimmerlich and Bobby. Okay. Good thing I have your guys' email, so you guys will get it right now.
Thank you.
All right, so let me share my share screen and do some final notes, and we will move on from there. Let's see, make sure I got the right one. All right, guys. Thank you, David, for your presentation. It's freaking awesome. I have to say, it was very insightful, very inspiring, and yes, we'll learn a lot from you. And I appreciate you sharing your institutional, inspirational knowledge with us. Very, very good.
No worries.
Yep. So 26 May upcoming events. We have Image USA is open for registration for those of you that want to go next year at National Harbor, Maryland. 7 June for those of you that are still continuing on with doing the CPP classes with me, David, and Jim. Will be over exposures and meters. And then 22 June is our own Dave Shields with the image critique. And remember, the submission's got to be in by the 17th of June. And it'll be a thumbs up,
Hey,
thumbs
Rex.
down. Yes.
On that CPP class, who's teaching that?
It'll be basically a review with me, Andrew, and
Andrew.
sorry, Andrew. Who did I say?
Me.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So me, Andrew, and Jim Walls. And then again,
Dave and I are
20
kind of the same person.
I know you all look alike so much, it's hard to tell you apart. But so then on the 28th of June, the CPP class will be on lighting. And then 6th July will be Michelle Parsley, fine art painting and Photoshop, which will also be a presentation like we're going through today. And then 6th July through 17 August, like Dave said, that we have registration for IPC. And then 26th July is CPP class over composition and design. And then it's not on the list yet. It'll be August, I believe, will be our next in-person meeting. And that'll be on next month's presentation. So again, David, thank you very much for your presentation today. It was very, very enjoyable.
Right on.
And so anybody else have anything for anybody else? If not, I'll end the meeting and thank you for attending the meeting this month. And we shall.
Hey, Rex.
Yes, sir.
Sorry. David just put in the chat just his email if anybody wants to ask him a question or anything. That fly@realityreimagined.com. So for those interested in further contacting David, just so they're aware of it.
Oh, yeah, and I checked his website out, checked his YouTube videos out. I mean, very cool, good information. I'm definitely gonna be looking into all your stuff because I'm gonna pick your brain on a few things.
Please do. I'm always around and always happy to help. So hit me up in social media or email me anytime.
All right, guys. You guys have a good evening and good rest of your week.
Awesome. Thank you, Rex.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.